Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the brutal laws of ancient Sparta, where the truth is that surviving childhood was more challenging than any warrior's tale. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You're 7 years old, and congratulations. You've just won an all-expenses-paid trip to the Spartan boot camp, better known as the Agoge. That's right. Your childhood has just been hijacked by ancient Sparta's state-sponsored version of Tough Mudder, where the obstacles are real, and the mud is mixed with the tears of your youth. Forget the warm embrace of family nights around the dinner table. Your new family is a squad of equally terrified young boys, and your new home is a dormitory as cozy as a Spartan shield. Now, don't get too comfortable, because comfort is as rare in Sparta as a day off. At the tender age of 7, you trade in toys for training spears, and bedtime stories for tales of heroes who probably died young and painfully. This is the Agoge, a rigorous and often brutal education system designed to churn out the toughest warriors in Greece. It's a curriculum that would make even the strictest modern boot camp look like a spa retreat. Your new life includes physical training that makes CrossFit look like a gentle yoga class, lessons in stealth that could rival a ninja's, and the occasional Spartan pastime of stealing cheese. Yes, you heard that right. Cheese theft is actually on the syllabus. You see, in Sparta, swiping cheese from the altar of Artemis Orthia is not just a culinary crime, but a commendable skill. The idea is to develop cunning and resourcefulness, because nothing says future military genius like a kid who can sneak past temple guards to nab a block of cheddar. And if you get caught, well, the punishment is a beating, because that's Spartan positive reinforcement for you. But why such an emphasis on these bizarre life lessons? Chalk it up to Sparta's unique economics and social strategy. In a society where every male was expected to become a soldier, the Agoge was essentially job training for the state's most crucial industry, warfare. Spartans didn't build empires through trade or diplomacy. They did it with muscle and a ruthless military machine. The state provided for you, and in return, you gave them your life. Quite literally, if you weren't careful. The Spartan economy was a tightly controlled affair. The men were full-time warriors, while the Helots, an enslaved population, took care of the agricultural grunt work. This system allowed Spartan citizens to focus on perfecting their martial skills without worrying about how to put bread, or in this case, barley and cheese, on the table. But this economic arrangement came with its own set of rules and expectations, like the duty to marry and produce more warrior offspring. That's right, even your love life was regulated by the state. Romantic, isn't it? Now, let's tackle the myth of the noble Spartan warrior, a tale romanticized by poets and Hollywood alike. These stories paint Spartans as the epitome of noble savagery, a disciplined band of brothers who fought for glory and honor. But the reality was far grimmer. Childhood in Sparta was no heroic saga. It was a grueling endurance test designed to toughen you up or break you down. Failure to meet the Agoge's demands could mean disgrace, or worse, death. Spartans were less about chivalry and more about survival of the fittest, a Darwinian drama staged centuries before Darwin's time. And speaking of survival, let's not forget the Crypteia, a sort of final exam for the Agoge's most promising graduates. This was a secretive and deadly rite of passage where young Spartans were sent into the countryside with nothing but a dagger, tasked with living off the land and killing troublesome Helots, because nothing says, "Welcome to adulthood," like state-sanctioned murder. It was a brutal initiation into the bloody business of Spartan life, far removed from the sanitized heroics of epic poetry. For all its harshness, the Spartan system did produce formidable warriors, but it came at a steep price. Individuality was sacrificed at the altar of communal strength. The state owned you from the moment you took your first wobbly steps toward the Agoge, and your identity was forged in the fires of collective discipline and relentless training. In summary, Spartan childhood was no picnic unless you count stealing cheese as a snack break. It was a relentless grind designed to strip away weakness and mold you into the perfect soldier. So next time someone waxes lyrical about the Spartan way of life, remember that behind every heroic legend lies the untold story of a 7-year-old with a stolen cheese wheel and a world of hardship ahead. Now that you've survived the cheese-stealing, temple guard dodging, Agoge graduating gauntlet of Spartan childhood, welcome to adulthood. But before you start thinking you're going to kick back with a goblet of wine and some me time, let's set the record straight. Comfort still isn't on the menu. In fact, neither is privacy. Instead, say hello to the Sisisha, which is essentially the ancient world's most exclusive and mandatory dinner club. Forget your living room. This is where the real action happens. The Sisisha wasn't just a place to chow down on some ancient delicacies. It was a cornerstone of Spartan society, where men gathered to eat, bond, and discuss the pressing military strategies of the day. Picture an adult version of the Agoge, but instead of stealing cheese, you're sharing it. The dining hall was more than a meal venue. It was a social crucible, a fraternity where camaraderie was forged over bowls of the infamous black broth. Now, if you're wondering what that is, think of it as a concoction so unappetizing that it made even the most hardcore Spartan warriors question their life choices. Economically, the Sisisha was a fascinating beast. Participation required contributing to the communal part, a monthly fee of sorts. This wasn't a bring-your-own-bottle affair. The cost was non-negotiable. Every Spartan male had to provide a certain amount of barley, wine, cheese, and figs. Miss your dues, and you risked losing your citizenship status, the ancient equivalent of being unfriended on social media, but with far graver consequences. Forget about skipping dinner for a quiet night in. A no-show at the Sisisha could mean a one-way ticket to social Siberia. And why was this system so strict? Well, Sparta wasn't just about building warriors. It was about maintaining a rigid class structure. The Sisisha acted as a glue that kept the social order intact, ensuring every Spartan male was continuously reminded of his duty to the state. It was a subtle yet effective way of reinforcing loyalty and unity. The communal meal wasn't just about food. It was a tool of political indoctrination and social cohesion. In terms of economics, maintaining the Sisisha was no small feat. The Spartan state's resources were primarily funneled into military spending. It was a society that didn't dabble in luxury goods or elaborate art. Their currency was made of iron bars to avoid wealth accumulation. This communal dining system was a clever workaround to ensure that resources were shared and utilized efficiently without the pitfalls of personal wealth. The Sisisha was also a breeding ground for Spartan wit and wisdom, where the sharpest tongues could earn respect and influence. These gatherings were like the Twitter of ancient Sparta, where quick retorts and clever banter were the currency of choice. But don't be fooled by the camaraderie. Beneath the convivial surface, there was a clear hierarchy. Younger men served the older, and everyone knew their place in the pecking order. The stakes were high, and the pressure was relentless. The Sisisha reinforced the idea that your primary identity was that of a soldier, a cog in the Spartan war machine. Missing out wasn't just a personal loss. It was a blow to your standing as a citizen, a potential threat to your family's honor. It was a game of social chess, and every move counted. Myth has it that Spartans were a merry band of equals, toasting to valor and victory. But the reality was more complex. The Sisisha was a constant reminder of the social barriers that divided the Spartan population. The Helots, for instance, were conspicuously absent from these gatherings, their labor supporting the very system that excluded them. While the dining halls echoed with tales of glory, the Helots toiled in the fields, a stark contrast to the ideals of unity and equality. In essence, the Sisisha was a microcosm of Spartan society. It was where the veneer of equal brotherhood was both upheld and scrutinized. The romantic appeal of Spartan equality glosses over the social stratification and the coercive undercurrent that kept everyone in line. It was an institution that bound men together in a shared fate, yet simultaneously underscored the divisions that defined their world. So, next time you hear about the noble Spartan warriors exchanging oaths over communal meals, remember the bigger picture. These gatherings were not just about fellowship. They were a sophisticated mechanism of control, a strategic blend of sustenance and subjugation, where the cost of dinner was more than just a few drachmas. It was your place in the Spartan order. As we move forward, keep in mind that behind every spoonful of black broth was a society meticulously engineered for war, discipline, and an unwavering sense of duty. And that, my friend, is the real taste of Sparta. With each spoonful of black broth, you're not just tasting Sparta's culinary delights, but gulping down the essence of its political machinery as well. Let's take a trip to the heart of this well-oiled war machine, where two kings are better than one. That's right. Sparta didn't just double down on war tactics. They doubled up on their rulers, too. It sounds like a plot twist in a buddy cop movie, but in this case, it's two royal partners in command, juggling the state affairs of a city, perpetually on the brink of war. Now, why two kings? Were the Spartans just indecisive, or was there a method to their madness? The dual kingship was a unique feature of Spartan governance, a balancing act that made Sparta stand out like a sore thumb in the Greek political landscape. The idea was simple yet effective. One king focused on leading the troops in battle, while the other held down the fort back home. Think of it as having a CEO and a COO, but instead of corporate strategy meetings, they discussed military campaigns and state rituals. Each king came from one of two royal families, the Achaemenids and the Eurypontids, ensuring that if one line got a little too ambitious, the other was there to keep them in check. It was almost like a built-in insurance policy against tyranny. But wait, there's more. Enter the Gerousia, or the Council of Elders, the ancient world's version of a senate, if your senators were seasoned warriors with a penchant for discipline. Composed of 28 elders over the age of 60, plus the two kings, the Gerousia acted as a deliberative body that proposed laws, judged criminal cases, and generally kept the kings on a short leash. They were the wise old owls in a city of war hawks, ensuring that decisions weren't made in the heat of the moment or the throes of battle rage. If you think that sounds like a lot of cooks in the kitchen, you're spot on. But it worked for Sparta, adding a layer of complexity to their governance that was as robust as their military strategies. The Gerousia served for life, which meant their wisdom or stubbornness was a constant presence in Spartan politics. Imagine running your country with a team of Gandalf-like figures, each with a lifetime of experience and hopefully wisdom to offer. The balance of power was crafted with the precision of a spear tip, designed to prevent any one faction from running away with too much control. Now, before you start thinking this was a perfect system of checks and balances, let's throw in the ephors for good measure. These were 5 officials elected annually, each serving as watchdogs over the kings and the Gerousia. The ephors could call the kings to account, oversee the education system, and even declare war. If the kings were the stars of this Spartan show, the ephors were the directors making sure the plot didn't spiral into a tragedy. They were elected by the people, which gave them the street cred to challenge even the most iron-willed monarchs. In theory, this three-headed hydra of kings, elders, and ephors should have been a recipe for chaos. Instead, it was a model of governance that kept Sparta on track for centuries, a political balancing act that made even the most ambitious Athenians green with envy. It was a system designed to be as unyielding and disciplined as the soldiers it produced, where every role was defined, and every person knew their place in the grand mosaic of Spartan society. But before you get swept away by the romance of this ancient political ballet, let's not forget the grim reality. This wasn't democracy as we know it. The kings might have carried the title, but real power was dispersed among the elite few, and the average Spartan citizen had as much chance of influencing politics as a helot did of attending the Syssitia. The ephors, with their annual terms, could be seen as a nod towards democratic principles, but let's not kid ourselves. Sparta was no Athens. The state was a rigid hierarchy where the gears of war and governance turned in unison, each cog playing its part in the relentless drive towards military supremacy. And what about the helots and the perioikoi? They were the backbone of Spartan society, yet they had no say in its governance. The helots, in particular, lived under a regime of terror, with the constant threat of the crypteia looming over them. The perioikoi, free but not full citizens, managed trade and craftsmanship, filling the roles that Spartans couldn't or wouldn't do. Yet, for all their contributions, their voices were as muted as a Spartan smile. This is where the romanticized vision of Spartan equality shatters, like a dropped amphora. The system was designed to sustain the warrior elite, a small fraction of the population whose entire existence was devoted to the art of war. External threats were met with brutal efficiency, while internal dissent was quashed with equal zeal. Spartan political life was a high-stakes game of survival, where the lines between order and oppression blurred in the pursuit of stability. So, while the dual kingship, the esteemed Gerousia, and the vigilant Ephors might sound like an ancient precursor to modern governance, they were part of a much harsher reality. Sparta's political structure was as much about control as it was about balance, a delicate dance that kept the city-state from tipping into chaos. It was a world where power was both shared and hoarded, a paradox that kept Sparta standing long after other Greek city-states had faded from glory. As we delve deeper into the politics of Sparta, remember that the real story lies beneath the myths. It's not just about kings donning ceremonial robes or elders dispensing wisdom from on high. It's about a society engineered for one purpose: survival through strength. In the end, the true legacy of Spartan governance is not the grandeur of its dual kingship or the wisdom of its elders, but the relentless drive to maintain order in a world defined by conflict and conquest. We'll continue peeling back these layers of Spartan society, exploring how these political dynamics shape their world and ours. And speaking of peeling back layers, let's dive into the fascinating world of Spartan women, a paradox wrapped in a tunic, if you will. Now, if you think the men had it tough with their agoge and Sisisha rituals, wait till you hear what the women were up to. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all weaving and whispering behind closed doors, like their Athenian counterparts. Spartan women were a breed apart, with a lifestyle that would make even modern feminists raise an eyebrow or two. First off, let's talk rights. Compared to the rest of ancient Greece, Spartan women were living the dream, or at least a dream adjacent. They could own and inherit property, a revolutionary concept in a time when women elsewhere were about as autonomous as the family pet. In fact, by some estimates, Spartan women controlled nearly 40% of the land. And they weren't just passive landowners. They actively managed these estates, showing a level of economic clout that was practically unheard of in the ancient world. It's like giving Cleopatra the keys to the treasury and telling her to have at it. But hold your horses, or your war chariots, before you start picturing a proto-Greek version of the women's liberation movement. Spartan women's freedoms came with a catch, and it was a big one. They were expected to bear strong children, preferably boys who could be molded into the next generation of Spartan warriors. This wasn't just a societal nicety, it was a state mandate. The pressure to produce was as relentless as a Spartan drill sergeant at a cheese-stealing contest. The state even facilitated a kind of early matchmaking service, encouraging selective breeding among the best and brightest. If your husband was too old to contribute to the gene pool, no worries. You could, with the state's blessing, find a more suitable candidate to help you fulfill your patriotic duty. Talk about a progressive take on marital arrangements, or a dystopian one, depending on your viewpoint. Spartan women were also expected to be as physically fit as their male counterparts. They engaged in sports, competed in athletic contests, and were known for their rigorous exercise routines. This wasn't just for personal fitness or vanity, though who doesn't like to look good in a chitin? No, the idea was that strong women would produce strong offspring, belief that neatly dovetailed with the state's obsession with military excellence. So while Athenian women were busy perfecting their loom skills, Spartan women were out running, wrestling, and throwing javelins, all in the name of producing future warriors. Now, let's debunk a myth or two about Spartan equality. The romantic notion of Spartan society as a bastion of gender equality is, shall we say, a bit overcooked. While women enjoyed more rights than their Greek sisters, they were still very much second-class citizens in a male-dominated world. Their freedom was bound by their role as mothers of soldiers, their autonomy tied directly to their contribution to the state's war machine. It was less about personal liberty and more about state service, a trade-off that doesn't quite fit the egalitarian narrative. Even their education, while more extensive than that of other Greek women, was designed with a singular purpose: to support the Spartan war effort. They learned reading and writing, yes, but their curriculum was peppered with lessons in stoicism and self-discipline, ensuring they were as mentally tough as the men they were expected to raise. It was an education system that valued utility over enlightenment, preparing women to be the backbone of a society perpetually at war. And let's not forget the infamous Spartan marriage ceremony, which was less about romance and more about practicality. The bride was abducted, yes, abducted, by her would-be husband, her hair cut short to resemble a boy's. This wasn't some quaint tradition. It was a reflection of Sparta's militaristic culture, where even the rites of love were tinged with the shadow of war. Despite these rigid expectations, Spartan women wielded considerable influence behind the scenes. They were known for their outspoken nature, and were said to have encouraged their sons to return from battle either with their shield or on it. This phrase, while emblematic of Spartan valor, also highlights the intense pressure on women to uphold and perpetuate the warrior ethos. Economically, the role of women was crucial in maintaining the Spartan system. With men away at war or training, women managed households and estates, making key decisions that kept the Spartan economy ticking over. This economic empowerment was a double-edged sword, granting them influence, but also tying their worth to their ability to sustain the war machine. In essence, Spartan women were both liberated and constrained, a paradox that defies easy categorization. Their rights and responsibilities were intricately woven into the fabric of Spartan society, a tapestry where their personal freedom was inextricably linked to their role as mothers and managers. It was a world where gender roles were defined not by equality, but by expediency, each person a cog in the relentless pursuit of military perfection. So, the next time you hear about the fierce independence of Spartan women, remember to scratch beneath the surface. Their story is one of unique freedoms and heavy burdens, testament to the complexities of a society that revered strength above all else. It's a tale of women who were warriors in their own right, not on the battlefield, but in the home, the fields, and the very structure of Spartan life. As we continue our exploration of Spartan society, keep in mind that these women were more than just footnotes in a male-dominated history. They were integral to the Spartan experiment, their lives a testament to the intricate interplay of power, duty, and survival in one of history's most enigmatic cultures. So here's to the Spartan women, not just mothers of warriors, but warriors of a different kind, grappling with a world that demanded both strength and sacrifice. And as we delve further into the complexities of Spartan life, let's not forget these formidable women who stood, not behind, but alongside their men, embodying the indomitable spirit of a society built on the art of war. And speaking of formidable women, let's zoom out and take a panoramic view of Sparta, the little city-state that could, and did for a while. Sparta's reputation as the ultimate warrior society has captured imaginations for centuries. But like any good legend, it's part reality, part myth, and a whole lot of Hollywood embellishment. Let's get down to brass tacks, or in Sparta's case, iron bars. At its peak around 480 BCE, Sparta was a force to be reckoned with, boasting a military prowess that seemed nearly invincible. The Battle of Thermopylae is Sparta's piece de resistance, a historical blockbuster that has inspired countless retellings. Who hasn't heard of those 300 Spartans holding the line against a gazillion Persians? Okay, maybe not a gazillion, but the Persian army was massive. Estimates suggest between 70,000 and 300,000 troops, depending on which ancient historian had the most flair for drama. But here's the scoop. The battle wasn't just a Spartan show. They were backed by other Greek allies, totaling around 7,000 resilient souls standing against the Persian juggernaut. Yet, it's the Spartans who hog the spotlight, their last stand immortalized as a symbol of courage and sacrifice. And while their heroics are undeniable, let's not overlook that this was a strategic retreat, intended to buy time for the rest of Greece to rally. The romanticized image of the Spartan warrior, therefore, is a bit like a blockbuster movie, thrilling, but not the whole truth. Now, as much as we love the idea of these unstoppable warriors, reality has a tendency to rain on parades. The Spartan system, built on rigorous discipline and a heavy dose of state control, was a double-edged sword. While it produced soldiers who could stare down death with a steely gaze, it also created a society that left little room for innovation, art, or diplomacy. Sparta was essentially a one-trick pony, and its trick was war. The Spartan obsession with military dominance came at a steep price. Their rigid social structure and economic model, heavily reliant on the subjugation of the Helots, was a powder keg waiting to explode. The Helots, the enslaved population who outnumbered the Spartans by as much as 7 to 1, were the undercurrent of Spartan society. Their labor kept the Spartan war machine running, but their discontent simmered dangerously beneath the surface. The constant threat of rebellion forced the Spartans to devote considerable resources to maintaining control over them, a situation that was as unsustainable as it was oppressive. This brings us to the crux of Sparta's legacy. The city-state's emphasis on military might over all else eventually become its Achilles heel. While the Spartans excelled in war, they lagged in diplomacy and economics. Their iron currency, designed to avoid the pitfalls of wealth accumulation, also hindered trade and economic growth. Sparta was a society that could conquer but struggled to build, and this imbalance ultimately led to its decline. By the 4th century BCE, Spartan power began to wane. The Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE was a turning point, where the Thebans handed Sparta a crushing defeat, unraveling its aura of invincibility. The loss was more than just a military setback. It was a blow to the very heart of Spartan identity. The Spartan system, so focused on producing warriors, had no contingency plan for defeat. It was like a high-stakes game where all bets were placed on a single hand, only to find the deck stacked against them. So what remains of Sparta today, beyond the dust of history and the echo of its legends? A complex legacy. On one hand, Sparta is celebrated for its military discipline and the courage of its warriors, ideals that have inspired countless military leaders throughout history. On the other hand, its rigid, authoritarian society serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing militarism over cultural and economic development. Sparta's influence on Western civilization is a paradox. While its martial values and emphasis on discipline have been lauded, its lack of adaptability and inclusivity are reminders that strength without flexibility can lead to fragility. It's a lesson that echoes across the ages. A society that cannot evolve is doomed to be outpaced by those that can. Today, the ruins of Sparta offer a quiet testament to its past glories and eventual downfall. They stand as a reminder that even the mightiest can fall, undone by the very systems that once ensured their supremacy. And as we sift through the layers of myth and reality, we're left with a richer understanding of a society that was as complex as it was contradictory. So, the next time someone regales you with tales of Spartan heroics, remember the full story. Behind the legends of valor lies a world where discipline was both a sword and a shackle, and where the pursuit of strength led not to eternal glory, but to an inevitable reckoning. The real legacy of Sparta is not just the warriors who stood at Thermopylae, but the lessons they left behind. Lessons about the balance of power, the cost of empire, and the enduring struggle to find harmony between discipline and innovation in the tapestry of human history. Cyrus the Great wasn't born with an empire. He had to build it from scratch, like one of those garage startups that ends up taking over the world. Before Cyrus, ancient Persia was a patchwork quilt of small kingdoms and tribes, each with dreams bigger than their armies. Enter Anshan, an unimpressive blip on the map that would become the unlikely launchpad for world domination. Anshan was a bit like the garage in our startup story, providing the modest beginnings for what would become the Achaemenid Empire. Now, the region of Persia was a hotbed of ambition, with everyone trying to elbow their way into the history books. But here's the twist. Cyrus didn't just want to be a footnote. He aimed for the whole chapter. Born around 600 BCE in Anshan, Cyrus was like the kid from a small town with dreams of making it big in the city. His grandfather, Astyages, was king of the Median Empire, a neighboring superpower, and let's just say family dinners were probably tense. The Medes were the bullies on the block, and Astyages, ruling from his capital at Ecbatana, had plans to keep it that way. But Cyrus had inherited more than just his grandfather's DNA. He had guts, vision, and an unshakable belief in destiny. He emerged from Anshan with a mission to unite the fractious Persian tribes under one banner. This wasn't just about wielding power, it was about crafting an identity. In an age where might made right, Cyrus understood that a shared culture could make a kingdom more than the sum of its parts. His first move, subdue the Medes and expand his influence. In 550 BCE, Cyrus pulled off a political coup that would make Machiavelli proud. He led a successful revolt against Astyages, flipping the script on the Median Empire. Suddenly, the underdog was the top dog. With the Medes under his control, Cyrus didn't just stop to pat himself on the back. He saw the whole region as his oyster and Persia as the pearl. The conquest not only doubled his power, but also served as a springboard for further expansion. But hold on, before we get too swept up in this tale of triumph, let's bust a few myths. Cyrus wasn't some benevolent king who charmed his way to the top. Early sources, like those from the historian Herodotus, paint him as a savvy strategist and a shrewd politician. He knew when to use diplomacy and when to let his soldiers do the talking. The idea of him as a magnanimous ruler is partly a product of later propaganda, primarily from the Greeks who admired his legacy. His next big move was Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia. In 539 BCE, Cyrus captured Babylon without a fight, thanks to some brilliant military tactics and perhaps a little inside help from Babylonian priests dissatisfied with their king, Nabonidus. Cyrus didn't just topple a city, he walked in as a liberator, declaring himself the restorer of order. He respected local customs and religions, which was a smart move to ensure stability. The famous Cyrus Cylinder, often dubbed the first charter of human rights, was his PR masterstroke, outlining his policies of tolerance and fairness. Cyrus is often remembered for his humility, but let's not kid ourselves. Humility is easier when you're the guy holding all the cards. He was a master of optics. His empire was vast, stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, covering more than 2 million square miles. It was a logistical nightmare, yet he managed it with a combination of local governance and centralized oversight. And here's another fun fact: the Royal Road. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of the interstate highway system, stretching over 600 miles, allowing for rapid communication across the empire. It was a game changer, making sure that no matter where you were in the empire, you were never too far from the king's reach or his influence. Cyrus's empire was revolutionary not just for its size, but for its innovative administration. Instead of micromanaging, he appointed satraps, or governors, to oversee different regions. These satraps had a fair degree of autonomy as long as they paid their taxes and kept the peace. It was like running a franchise, with the satraps as the local managers and Cyrus as the CEO. This structure would become a model for future empires, including Rome and Byzantium. But the empire wasn't built on bureaucracy alone. It thrived on trade. The region was a bustling marketplace, with goods flowing from India, Egypt, Greece, and beyond. This economic boom was supported by a standardized system of weights and measures, making trade more efficient and less of a headache for merchants. And let's not forget the introduction of coinage, which made transactions even smoother. Cyrus's story isn't just a tale of conquest. It's a lesson in leadership, innovation, and the power of vision. His legacy was so formidable that even after his death in 530 BCE, the empire he built continued to grow. His successors, like Darius the Great, would expand its borders even further. But it was Cyrus who laid the foundation, proving that even a small-time player from a place like Anshan could reshape the world. As we wrap this up, let's return to that underdog theme. Cyrus's rise from Anshan to the throne of a colossal empire is a testament to what happens when ambition meets opportunity. He took a collection of small-time players and forged them into a powerhouse that not only dominated its neighbors, but also left an indelible mark on history. It's a classic story of humble beginnings, strategic brilliance, and relentless ambition, and one that continues to inspire those who aim to transform their own corners of the world. But Cyrus wasn't just about the glitz of conquest. He was the ancient world's answer to a strategic chess master, plotting moves that would leave even the most seasoned generals scratching their heads. After securing Babylon in 539 BCE, Cyrus set his sights on Lydia, a kingdom that sat on a fortune in gold and controlled critical trade routes. Imagine the allure of such a prize. It was like someone handing you the keys to the Fort Knox of the ancient world. But as with all good stories, there was a catch. Lydia was ruled by King Croesus, a man so wealthy that his name became synonymous with unimaginable riches. Cyrus knew that to tackle Lydia, he needed more than just brute force. Croesus was no amateur. He had alliances with Sparta, Egypt, and Babylon before Cyrus took over. So, Cyrus played the long game. He engaged in a bit of psychological warfare, spreading misinformation through spies. Basically, ancient disinformation campaigns. It was a classic case of divide and conquer. with Cyrus ensuring Croesus's allies were too busy to lend a hand when push came to shove. When the armies finally clashed in 547 BCE, Cyrus used a tactical brilliance that was as much about brains as it was about brawn. He employed camels to spook the Lydian horses, turning what could have been a battle into a rout. Croesus, believing a winter break was in order, retreated to his capital, Sardes, feeling safe behind its fortified walls. But Cyrus wasn't one for seasonal campaigns. He pursued Croesus into the heart of Lydia. In a move that would make corporate raiders nod in approval, Cyrus captured Sardes, and with it, the wealth of Lydia. It wasn't just a military victory. It was an economic coup, giving Cyrus control over the region's wealth and trade networks. Lydia's famed gold reserves were now Persian assets, and the empire's coffers swelled like a tech startup after a successful IPO. Yet, the conquest of Lydia wasn't just about the bling. It was a strategic masterstroke that expanded Persian influence into Asia Minor, setting the stage for future expansions into the Greek city-states. But instead of painting Cyrus as some kind of ancient robber baron, let's dig into the paperwork behind the warfare. You see, Cyrus wasn't just swinging swords. He was signing treaties, drafting policies, and implementing a governance model that was refreshingly ahead of its time. Cyrus understood that an empire ruled by fear would eventually crumble, so he incorporated local customs and laws into his administration. The conquered regions were allowed to keep their languages and traditions, as long as they pledged loyalty and paid their dues to the Persian treasury. It was like a corporate merger where everyone kept their corner office, provided they wore the company pin. This decentralized approach wasn't just smart politics, it was a logistical necessity. With an empire that stretched over 2 million square miles, Cyrus needed a system that could handle the diversity of his sprawling domain. And let's not forget the paperwork. Cyrus's administration wasn't just a bunch of scribes with clay tablets. Oh no, this was bureaucracy with a purpose. The empire's success lay in its ability to collect taxes efficiently, maintain infrastructure, and ensure that laws were upheld across vast distances. The royal road, that ancient highway system we mentioned earlier, wasn't just for military use. It was the empire's nervous system, speeding up communication and trade, making sure no satrapy felt too remote from the imperial center. But Cyrus's expansion wasn't just a tale of swords and scrolls. It was about reshaping cultures and economies. The integration of Lydia into the Persian fold meant a cultural and economic exchange that enriched both sides. Lydia's coinage system, which had already revolutionized trade in the region, was now part of the Persian economic strategy. Coinage made transactions easier, and the empire's standardized weights and measures ensured that trade flowed smoothly, from the bustling markets of Sardes to the bazaars of Babylon. Yet for all his achievements, Cyrus's legacy is a blend of legend and reality. The romantic image of him as a liberator and wise ruler persists, but let's not forget the stark realities of empire building. His conquests weren't bloodless, and his policies, while progressive, were primarily designed to stabilize his rule and extract resources efficiently. It's easy to get caught up in the grandeur of his achievements, but the truth is, Cyrus was as much a product of his time as he was a shaper of it. As we continue this journey through the Achaemenid Empire, remember that Cyrus's story isn't just about the past. It's a reflection of human ambition, the complexities of leadership, and the eternal dance between power and responsibility. His empire was more than a geopolitical entity. It was a living organism, continually evolving and adapting to new challenges. And while Cyrus may have set the stage, the next acts in this historical drama will be played out by those who inherited his world-changing vision. Stay tuned, because the story of Persia's rise isn't just ancient history. It's a testament to the enduring power of innovation and strategy in shaping human destiny. And speaking of those who inherited Cyrus's world-changing vision, let's roll out the red carpet for Darius I, the Empire's ultimate project manager. Imagine a guy who looked at the sprawling mess of an Empire Cyrus left behind and thought, you know, what this place really needs is a system. Darius was like the ancient world's answer to a Silicon Valley guru, but instead of apps, he was building an empire that would make the Romans green with envy. Darius I, who ruled from 522 to 486 BCE, wasn't just another king who happened to sit on a golden throne. Nope, This guy was a visionary administrator with a penchant for organization that could rival any modern-day CEO. When he took the reins, the empire was a patchwork quilt of cultures, languages, and currencies. His first order of business, standardization. Darius introduced a new coinage system, the gold daric and silver siglos, which streamlined trade across his territories. And here's a fun fact. Those coins became so iconic they were used long after his reign, a testament to their success. Now, why was this standardized coinage such a big deal? Well, imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread in a market where every stall accepts a different form of currency. Before Darius, that's exactly what merchants faced. By unifying the monetary system, Darius made trade as smooth as a Persian rug. It also meant taxes could be collected more efficiently, which, let's face it, was probably the real motivator here. You see, Darius understood that an empire runs on taxes, not just dreams. And speaking of taxes, let's delve into the empire's tax system, which was as intricate as it was effective. Darius divided the empire into about 20 satrapies, each responsible for a fixed annual tribute. This wasn't just some arbitrary number plucked from the air. It was calculated based on the region's wealth and resources. For example, Egypt, with its fertile lands, was expected to produce a hefty grain tribute, whereas India, famous for its gold, filled the coffers with precious metal. It was a system that ensured the empire's treasury was always full enough to fund its grand ambitions, and of course, Darius's penchant for monumental construction projects. But wait, there's more. Darius wasn't just about financial wizardry. He had an eye for infrastructure that would make a civil engineer swoon. Enter the Royal Road, a 677-mile marvel stretching from Sardis to Susa. This wasn't just a dusty track through the desert. It was a meticulously maintained route with way stations offering fresh horses and lodgings for traveling officials. And if you're wondering how fast information could travel, let's just say the Persian couriers could cover the entire road in about 7 days. Herodotus famously noted, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." Sound familiar? It should. It's basically the ancient version of the Postal Service's unofficial creed. Darius's road system wasn't just about speed. It was about control. By ensuring rapid communication, he could keep tabs on his satraps, making sure no one got any funny ideas about independence. It was as much about asserting authority as it was about efficiency. And let's not forget, this infrastructure facilitated trade, bolstering the economy and further cementing Darius's legacy as the empire's logistical mastermind. Yet, for all his achievements, Darius wasn't just the empire's benevolent administrator. He had a more iron-fisted side, especially when it came to maintaining order. Take, for instance, the revolts he faced at the beginning of his reign. The empire was a simmering pot of rebellious satraps, each with their own ambitions. Darius's response: swift, decisive action that quashed revolts in places like Babylon and Egypt, sometimes with a brutality that reminds us empire building wasn't all about coins and roads. But here's the kicker. While Darius was centralizing power and implementing his grand vision, he was also savvy enough to accommodate the diverse cultures under his rule. He respected local customs and religions, much like Cyrus before him, understanding that an iron fist was only effective if wrapped in a velvet glove. This ability to balance strength with tolerance was key to the empire's stability. And yet, for all his administrative genius, Darius's reign wasn't without its challenges. The Greek cities in Ionia were a constant thorn in his side, leading to the infamous Greco-Persian Wars. But we'll leave that drama for another day. For now, let's just appreciate Darius's knack for turning chaos into a well-oiled machine, even if it was occasionally sprinkled with a bit of tyrannical flair. Darius's reign was a masterclass in empire management, showcasing the power of organization, innovation, and the occasional show of force. His policies laid the groundwork for an empire that would stand the test of time, influencing countless civilizations to come. So, while it's easy to get lost in the romance of ancient Persia, let's not forget the practical realities that made it all possible. Darius wasn't just building an empire, he was crafting a legacy that would echo through history. And as we continue to weave through the story of the Achaemenid Empire, remember that behind every great civilization are the unsung heroes of bureaucracy and infrastructure. Stay tuned, because the saga of Persia's rise is far from over. And here we are, standing on the precipice of what can only be described as the Empire's midlife crisis. The Achaemenid Empire, under Darius's successors, faced the kind of challenges that would make any ruler reach for a stiff drink. We're talking internal revolts, external threats, and a handful of leadership choices that were, let's say, questionable at best. This was the era when the golden sheen of Persian propaganda started to show its cracks. First up to bat in this saga of successors was Xerxes I, Darius's son, who reigned from 486 to 465 BCE. Xerxes inherited the largest empire the world had seen, which sounds great until you realize it's like being handed the keys to a highly combustible sports car. Underneath the polished exterior, the engine was sputtering, and Xerxes, well, he wasn't exactly the mechanic his father was. Let's start with the most famous hiccup on Xerxes' watch, the Greco-Persian Wars. You might recall his attempt to conquer Greece, the sequel to Darius's own adventures in the region. Now, Xerxes had ambition, sure, but his campaign was like a summer blockbuster that spent most of its budget on special effects and forgot about the script. The Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE gave us the legendary story of 300 Spartans and their slightly less famous buddies, holding out against a much larger Persian force. While this tale has been Hollywood's darling, the reality was a bit more nuanced. The Persians did eventually overrun the Greeks at Thermopylae, but they were bogged down by logistics, a recurring theme in any empire trying to throw its weight around on foreign soil. Xerxes' real Waterloo, however, came at the naval Battle of Salamis, also in 480 BCE. Picture this: the Persian fleet, a hodgepodge of ships from across the empire, trying to navigate the narrow straits of Salamis, while the Greek navy, led by the cunning Themistocles, executed a perfect ambush. The result? A catastrophic defeat that sent Xerxes sulking back to Persia, leaving his general Mardonius to clean up the mess. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for Mardonius either. Now, let's talk about the home front. While Xerxes was busy with his escapades in Greece, his empire was simmering with discontent. Revolts flared up in Babylon and Egypt, both regions having long histories of rebelling against Persian control. Xerxes' response was as subtle as a sledgehammer. In Babylon, he went as far as to destroy the city's temples and melt down the sacred statue of Marduk, the chief deity, which was a bit like tearing down the Empire State Building to save on rent. Not exactly a recipe for winning hearts and minds. Xerxes' reign, despite its epic failures, wasn't all doom and gloom. He continued his father's legacy of grand construction projects, most famously the expansion of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital. But let's be honest, a shiny new city doesn't pay the bills or keep the provinces in line. The empire's coffers, once brimming with tributes, were starting to feel the strain of constant military campaigns and grandiose building schemes. It turns out, even ancient empires couldn't print their way out of debt. Fast forward to Artaxerxes I, Xerxes' son, who ruled from 465 to 424 BCE. If Xerxes was the empire's reckless teenager, Artaxerxes was its harried middle manager, trying to keep everything from falling apart. Unlike his father, Artaxerxes opted for diplomacy over warfare, a wise move considering the empire's resources were stretched thinner than a piece of baklava. He managed to broker peace with the Greeks in 449 BCE through the Peace of Callias, which effectively ended the Greco-Persian Wars. It was a move that gave both sides a chance to catch their breath and pretend they didn't just spend decades trying to annihilate each other. But Artaxerxes' reign wasn't without its own set of challenges. The empire was still plagued by internal revolts, notably in Egypt, where the locals had developed a habit of declaring independence every other Tuesday. Artaxerxes managed to suppress these uprisings, but each victory was more a temporary patch than a permanent fix. The underlying issues, cultural differences, economic burdens, and political discontent remained unresolved. And let's not forget the fun family dynamics at play. Artaxerxes faced his own share of palace intrigue, including an assassination attempt by his brother, which is the kind of sibling rivalry that really puts monopoly feuds into perspective. Despite these challenges, Artaxerxes did manage to keep the empire intact, which is no small feat given the circumstances. As we march further down the lineage, we meet Darius Roman II, who ruled from 423 to 404 BCE. His reign was marked by even more internal strife, and a particularly nasty civil war known as the Revolt of the Satraps. Think of it as a company-wide rebellion where all the regional managers decide they've had enough of corporate's nonsense. The instigators were the satraps of Lydia, Egypt, and Media, each with their own agendas and grievances against the central authority. Darius Roman II managed to quell the revolts, but it was clear that the empire was becoming increasingly unwieldy. What made these revolts particularly dangerous was that they weren't just about power grabs. They were symptomatic of deeper issues within the empire. The satraps were often left to their own devices, which worked well when times were good, but in periods of stress, it led to regional powers acting like mini-empires. The central authority in Persepolis was more like a distant relative who you'd see at weddings, not exactly the day-to-day presence the empire needed. As the empire struggled with its internal issues, external threats loomed large. The Persians had long been the dominant power in the region, but the winds of change were blowing. The Greek city-states, once fractured and squabbling, were starting to unite under the leadership of figures like Philip Roman II of Macedon. The stage was set for a new player to enter the fray, but that's a story for another day. For now, let's reflect on the legacy of these successors. While they lacked the visionary leadership of Cyrus or the organizational prowess of Darius I, they were adept at one thing: survival. They managed to keep the empire afloat through some of its most turbulent times, even if it meant occasionally papering over the cracks with grand projects and peace treaties. The Achaemenid Empire, for all its might and splendor, was a complex beast. It was a patchwork of cultures, languages, and economies, held together by a combination of force, diplomacy, and more than a little luck. The successors of Darius the Great had the unenviable task of maintaining this colossal structure, and while they may have stumbled along the way, they also demonstrated the resilience of an empire that, despite its flaws, was still a force to be reckoned with. As we prepare to dive into the final act of this grand narrative, remember that history is never just black and white. It's a tapestry of triumphs and failures, of brilliant strategies and epic blunders. The Achaemenid Empire was no different, and its story is far from over. So stay tuned, because the twists and turns of Persia's legacy are about to get even more intriguing. And as the curtain rises on the final act of the Achaemenid Empire, enter the new kid on the block, Alexander the Great. You might know him as the guy who never lost a battle, or the dude who cried because there were no more worlds to conquer. But before we get too starry-eyed, let's strip away the legend and see how this Macedonian upstart dismantled the empire built by Cyrus, Darius, and their successors, all while setting the stage for his own legacy. We're in the year 334 BCE, and Alexander, at the tender age of 22, is strutting into Asia Minor with an army that's more like a traveling circus of ambition. His forces, numbering around 40,000, might seem puny next to the Persian juggernaut, but here's the kicker. Alexander's army was a well-oiled machine, commanded by a man who knew how to play the game of war like a chess grandmaster. And while the Persians had the numbers, they were plagued by the kind of bureaucratic bloat that would make a DMV proud. The first big showdown came at the Battle of the Granicus River. It was here that Alexander, showing the kind of audacity that would become his trademark, led a cavalry charge across the river, catching the Persians off guard. Picture the chaos. Macedonian cavalry crashing into the Persian lines, all while Alexander himself took a blow to the head. A literal headache that didn't stop him from snatching victory. This battle wasn't just a win, it was a statement. The message: the Achaemenid Empire's days were numbered. Fast forward to 333 BCE, and we're at the Battle of Issus. This time, Darius Roman III himself decided to take the field. Despite having a force that reportedly numbered around 100,000, Darius found himself outmaneuvered, thanks to Alexander's tactical brilliance. The battle was a disaster for the Persians, and Darius fled, leaving behind his family and enough treasure to make a dragon jealous. Let's just say, this wasn't the kind of family vacation he'd planned. But Alexander wasn't just interested in military victories. He had a knack for PR that would make a modern spin doctor weep with envy. Upon taking the city of Tyre in 332 BCE, after a grueling 7-month siege, Alexander didn't just conquer. He incorporated the local customs and allowed religious practices to continue, much like Cyrus had done centuries earlier. It was a smart move, ensuring that his new subjects saw him as a liberator rather than a conqueror. As Alexander swept through Egypt, the oracle at the Siwa oasis famously declared him the son of Zeus. Now, whether or not the oracle had a flair for drama, Alexander certainly played up the divine endorsement, reinforcing his image as a leader of destiny. In 331 BCE, at the Battle of Gorgamla, he faced Darius Roman III again. Despite being outnumbered, this time, Darius had assembled a force of around 200, 000. Alexander's tactical genius and the disciplined Macedonian phalanx turned the tide. Darius fled once more, and with that, the door to Persia swung wide open. Marching into Babylon, Susa, and finally Persepolis, Alexander didn't just conquer, he absorbed. He adopted Persian dress, married a Persian princess, and began incorporating Persian officials into his administration. It was a shrewd move, blurring the lines between conqueror and ruler and ensuring a smoother transition of power. But while Alexander was busy playing cultural chameleon, the empire he was piecing together was more quilt than tapestry, a patchwork that would eventually unravel after his untimely death in 323 BCE. So, the Achaemenid Empire fell, but its legacy, oh, that was just getting started. The administrative systems pioneered by Cyrus and refined by Darius laid the groundwork for how large empires could be managed. Their infrastructure projects, like the Royal Road, became the blueprints for future civilizations. Even Alexander's empire, which fragmented into smaller Hellenistic kingdoms after his death, retained many Persian innovations, from coinage to governance. And let's not overlook the cultural impact. The fusion of Greek and Persian cultures under Alexander, the Hellenistic period, sparked an exchange of ideas that would influence art, architecture, philosophy, and science for centuries. The Library of Alexandria, for instance, became a beacon of knowledge, a fitting tribute to a period where East met West in a grand exchange. The Achaemenid Empire may have been conquered, but it was never forgotten. Its echoes can be found in the Roman Empire, which admired and adopted many Persian practices, from their postal system to their roads. Even the concept of an emperor, a ruler of rulers, finds its roots in the Persian model of the King of Kings. In the end, the fall of the Achaemenid Empire was not just the end of one chapter, but the beginning of many others. It was a testament to the resilience of ideas, proving that while armies might fall, the innovations they carry often find new life in the hands of their conquerors. As we close this chapter, let's remember that history is a mosaic of human ambition, conflict, and creativity, a tapestry woven with the threads of triumph and defeat, each as vital as the other. So, next time you think of ancient Persia, don't just picture the grand palaces or the epic battles. Remember the roads that connected distant lands, the policies that governed diverse peoples, and the legacy that, even in defeat, continued to shape the world. Because in history, as in life, the end is often just the beginning of another story. In the chilly air of Prussia, during May 1729, a baby named Sophia was born, blissfully unaware that she was destined to become one of Russia's most formidable rulers. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, we're talking about a baby who had no clue she'd be swapping pigtails for a crown. Sophia was the daughter of Prince Christian August of Anhalt-Zerbst and Princess Johanna Elizabeth of Holstein-Gardau, two nobles with more titles than cash flow. Her family was noble, sure, but not exactly rolling in the kind of dough that would make them A-listers at the European courts. Fast forward to Sophia's teenage years, and things start getting interesting. At 14, she was shipped off to Russia, a country as foreign to her as a fish out of water. She was summoned by Empress Elizabeth of Russia, who had a grand plan to marry her off to the Empress's nephew, the Grand Duke Peter. Now, if you think your teenage years were awkward, try being a German-speaking teen thrust into the Russian court, where the only thing colder than the winters was the reception from the royal family. To add to the drama, Sophia had to convert to Russian Orthodoxy, ditching her Lutheran faith like last season's fashion, and was given a new name, Catherine. Just imagine that identity crisis. Catherine's entrance into Russia was anything but smooth. Picture this, a young girl navigating the labyrinth of Russian court life, where gossip was the national sport and alliances shifted faster than the Moscow weather. But Catherine wasn't just any girl. She was sharp as a tack and quickly grasped the social dynamics at play. Her husband-to-be, Grand Duke Peter, was, let's be generous, an acquired taste. He was more interested in toy soldiers than in ruling a country, and his immaturity was as legendary as his love for all things Prussian, which didn't exactly endear him to his Russian subjects. Despite this, Catherine played her role with finesse. She learned Russian, not just the language but the culture and customs, understanding that to survive, and eventually thrive, she had to blend in. She studied Russian politics, history, and even military strategy, showing a determination to be more than just a decorative piece in the Russian court. It was in these early years that her legendary wit began to shine through. Once, when asked why she worked so hard, she quipped that she might be an ornament of the state, but she preferred to be its pillar. Not bad for a teenager, right? Catherine's relationship with Peter was, to put it mildly, complicated. Their arranged marriage was a union of political convenience rather than a love match. Peter was more interested in playing soldier than playing husband, and his antics were often the talk of the court. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia, which was not exactly popular in Russia, especially given the ongoing hostilities between the two nations. Catherine, on the other hand, had her eyes on a bigger prize, the Russian throne itself. She knew that to succeed, she had to outsmart the men around her, many of whom underestimated her simply because she was a woman. Her sharp wit often saved her from the pitfalls of court life. On one occasion, when a courtier criticized her for reading too much, she sharped back. A great many books are to be read, but even more are to be skipped. She was charming and knew how to play the long game, building alliances that would later prove crucial. But let's circle back to the Russian court, which was a hotbed of intrigue and excess. Empress Elizabeth, Peter's aunt, was a colorful character herself, known for her lavish parties, and penchant for wearing the same dress only once. The Empress was fond of Catherine, seeing in her a reflection of her younger self, but that didn't make Catherine's life any easier. Elizabeth's court was a political minefield, and Catherine had to tread carefully, balancing her ambitions with the need to stay in the Empress's good graces. The cultural shock Catherine experienced was immense. Imagine swapping German orderliness for Russian opulence, Lutheran restraint for Orthodox splendor. Yet, Catherine adapted, proving her mettle time and again. She learned that survival in the Russian court required more than just cunning. It demanded resilience and a willingness to embrace change. As she once reportedly said, "I may be a foreigner, but I intend to be a real Russian." And a real Russian she became, immersing herself in the language and customs until she was indistinguishable from those born to the land. Catherine's early years in Russia were a masterclass in patience and strategy, a testament to her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. She understood that power was not given but taken, and she was more than ready to take it. Her journey from Sophia to Catherine the Great was just beginning, but even in those formative years, the seeds of greatness were already firmly planted. Keep an eye on this one, because her story is about to get even juicier. But let's hit pause on Catherine's budding ambition and take a closer look at how she navigated the treacherous waters of the Russian court. We're talking about a court where backstabbing was practically an Olympic sport, and Catherine was determined to win gold. She wasn't just another pretty face in a sea of brocade and powdered wigs. She was a strategic powerhouse, calculating her every move with the precision of a chess grandmaster. Her first move was learning the language, not just Russian, but the dialect of court politics. And believe me, they didn't come with subtitles. She threw herself into studying Russian history and customs like a college student cramming for finals. This wasn't just about fitting in, it was about survival. Catherine understood that knowledge was power, and she intended to be the most powerful player in the game. Her tutors were some of the best minds in Russia, and she soaked up their teachings like a sponge. She read voraciously, everything from military treatises to Voltaire's philosophical musings. This was a woman who could discuss Kant over breakfast and military strategy over dinner, all in a day's work. Now, about Empress Elizabeth, the original drama queen of the Russian court. Picture a woman who threw parties so lavish they made Gatsby look like an amateur. Elizabeth was a formidable ruler, known for her love of luxury and her penchant for changing outfits more often than most people changed their minds. But beneath all that silk and satin was a sharp political mind, and she saw potential in Catherine. They had a complex relationship, to say the least. Elizabeth admired Catherine's tenacity, but was also wary of her ambition. After all, the throne wasn't a team sport, and Elizabeth was in no rush to share her power. Catherine played her cards carefully, never openly challenging Elizabeth's authority, but subtly positioning herself as a competent and trustworthy ally. She knew that in a world where alliances shifted faster than the Russian seasons, having the Empress's favor was invaluable. However, she also realized that being too close could be just as dangerous. Court life was a tightrope, and Catherine walked it with the grace of an acrobat. Meanwhile, her marriage to Peter was less of a partnership and more of a soap opera. Peter was like a kid who never grew up, more interested in toy soldiers than state affairs. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia, much to the chagrin of his Russian subjects. Catherine, on the other hand, had a more pragmatic view of leadership. She understood that ruling a nation required more than just love of military drills. It required political savvy and a keen understanding of human nature. Despite their marital woes, Catherine knew that her position as Peter's wife was both a blessing and a curse. It gave her proximity to the throne, but it also tied her to a man who was, to put it mildly, a liability. She used her wit and charm to navigate their tumultuous relationship, often turning a blind eye to his indiscretions while building her own network of allies within the court. This was a masterclass in diplomacy, and Catherine was the star pupil. Her charm offensive was legendary. Catherine knew how to make people feel seen and heard, a skill that earned her many admirers. She was known for her sharp tongue and even sharper mind, quick to diffuse tension with a well-placed joke or an insightful comment. This wasn't just about being liked. It was about building a coalition that could support her ambitions when the time was right. Catherine's strategy extended beyond the court. She corresponded with some of the greatest minds of her time, engaging in intellectual debates that challenged her worldview and expanded her understanding of governance. Voltaire, Diderot, and other Enlightenment thinkers were her pen pals, and their ideas influenced her vision for Russia. This wasn't just idle chit-chat. It was a deliberate effort to position herself as a progressive leader, ready to steer Russia into a new era. Her efforts to educate herself were not just about personal growth. They were a calculated move to prove her worth as a ruler. Catherine understood that to be taken seriously, she had to be more than just a figurehead. She had to be a leader in her own right, capable of enacting the reforms that Russia desperately needed. And so, she studied, planned, and waited, biding her time until she could seize the reins of power. But even as she plotted her future, Catherine never lost sight of the harsh realities of her present. The Russian court was rife with intrigue, and one wrong move could spell disaster. Every day was a test of her resilience and resourcefulness, and she passed with flying colors. She was a foreigner in a land that was often hostile, yet she made it her own, transforming herself into a true Russian in every sense of the word. In these early years, Catherine's story was one of survival, adaptation, and ambition. She was a woman who refused to be defined by her circumstances, choosing instead to shape her destiny through sheer force of will. As she once said, "I am not afraid of storms, for I am learning how to sail my ship." And sail it she did, navigating the turbulent waters of Russian politics with a skill that would eventually earn her a place in history as one of the greatest rulers of all time. But that's a tale for another day. For now, we leave Catherine on the brink of greatness, her eyes set firmly on the horizon, ready to seize the future with both hands. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. But let's not get too comfortable in Catherine's world of strategy and potential. The stage was set for a twist that would rival any modern-day political thriller. The year was 1762, and the Russian court was a pressure cooker on the brink of exploding. Peter Roman III had finally ascended to the throne earlier that year, but his reign was about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Picture this: a ruler more interested in playing dress-up with Prussian uniforms than in keeping the vast Russian Empire in check. If Russia had a Yelp page, Peter's leadership would have had one-star reviews pouring in faster than you can say Prussian fanboy. Peter's affinity for all things Prussian wasn't just a quirky personality trait. It was a political liability. His attempts to pull Russia closer to Prussia sent ripples of discontent through the ranks of the Russian nobility and military. This was a country that had been at odds with Prussia for years, and aligning with them was like trying to sell sun hats in Siberia. Nobody was buying it. Peter's foreign policy blunders were matched only by his domestic missteps. He repealed the service requirement for nobles, which might sound like a good way to win friends, but in reality, it alienated the very military leaders who held the keys to power. Enter Catherine, stage right, ready to make her move. With her acute awareness of political nuance, she saw Peter's unpopularity as her golden ticket. The coup of 1762 wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment mutiny. It was a meticulously orchestrated affair, months in the making, with Catherine pulling the strings like the maestro of a symphony of conspiracy. She had the backing of the Orlov brothers, a charismatic group of military officers who saw in Catherine a leader worth following. Grigory Orlov, in particular, was not just an ally, but also rumored to be Catherine's lover. Talk about mixing business and pleasure. The coup itself was as swift as it was bloodless, a testament to Peter's lack of support and Catherine's strategic brilliance. On July 9, 1762, Catherine made her bold move. While Peter was off playing soldier at his summer residence in Oranienbaum, Catherine seized the moment. She rode into St. Petersburg, rallying the troops with promises of reform and stability. Her charisma was magnetic, and the soldiers, tired of Peter's antics, quickly pledged their allegiance to her. In less time than it takes to binge-watch a season of your favorite show, Catherine had secured the capital. Peter, caught off guard, and without a loyal army to back him, abdicated with little more than a whimper. Within 6 months of becoming Tsar, he was out, dethroned by his own wife. Catherine, meanwhile, was hailed as a liberator, a beacon of hope for a new and enlightened era. But before we pop the champagne, let's not forget, the reality of her rise was as gritty as it was glorious. The coup may have been swift, but it was also a gamble, a high-stakes game where the loser could pay with their life. Once the dust settled, Catherine faced the daunting task of consolidating her power. She was a woman alone on the throne in a man's world, and her position was anything but secure. The Russian court was still a snake pit of intrigue and betrayal, and Catherine had to navigate it with the precision of a tightrope walker. Her public image as the enlightened Empress was carefully curated, but behind the scenes, she was a political powerhouse, cutting deals and building alliances to fortify her rule. Economically, Russia was no picnic either. The treasury was in disarray, and inflation was rising faster than the price of bread. Catherine knew that to secure her reign, she had to stabilize the economy and win the support of the powerful landowning class. She enacted policies that favored the nobility, understanding that their loyalty was crucial to maintaining her grip on the throne. This wasn't just about keeping the nobles happy. It was about survival in a world where power could shift as swiftly as the Russian winter winds. Catherine's ascent was a masterclass in realpolitik, a reminder that power is rarely a straightforward affair. The romantic image of the enlightened Empress belies the harsh realities of her rise. Her path to the throne was paved with ambition, strategic brilliance, and a willingness to take risks that would make lesser leaders quake in their boots. She knew that to be a ruler was to wield both charm and cunning, and she had both in spades. Yet, Catherine's story isn't just one of political maneuvering. It's a testament to the power of reinvention. From an outsider in the Russian court to the ruler of one of the largest empires in the world, her journey was nothing short of extraordinary. She defied expectations, proving that a foreign-born woman could not only survive, but thrive in the cutthroat world of 18th century Russian politics. Her reign was poised to reshape the empire, but that, my friends, is a saga for another day. For now, we leave Catherine standing at the helm of a mighty nation, ready to steer it toward a future she was determined to shape. Stay tuned, because this is only the beginning of Catherine the Great's remarkable story. Standing at the helm of a mighty nation might sound like the climax of a rags-to-riches story, but for Catherine the Great, it was just the opening act. She stepped onto the Russian throne with the confidence of someone who had already weathered more storms than a seasoned sailor. The real challenge, navigating the turbulent seas of reform, diplomacy, and Enlightenment ideals in a realm where autocracy was the name of the game. First up, Catherine's ambitious reform program. We're talking about a woman who took one look at the sprawling chaos of the Russian government and decided it needed a makeover more drastic than a reality TV show transformation. She wasn't just rearranging the deck chairs. She was building a new ship entirely. Her reforms were like a well-planned menu at a banquet, designed to satisfy everyone from the nobility to the peasants, even if the latter got more crumbs than cake. Catherine launched the Knackers, a grand legislative commission in 1767 that aimed to codify laws and revamp Russia's legal system. Picture this: over 500 delegates from all social classes crammed into rooms debating everything from serfdom to criminal justice. It was as chaotic as it sounds, and spoiler alert, it didn't quite result in a new legal code. But hey, it was a start, and it showed Catherine meant business about modernization, even if it was more a demonstration of intent than a practical blueprint. On the cultural front, Catherine was a patron saint of the arts, in the very Russian, very expensive sense. The Hermitage Museum, you can thank her for that. She amassed a collection of over 4,000 paintings, turning St. Petersburg into a cultural hotspot that rivaled the great European capitals. Her correspondence with Voltaire wasn't just a casual pen-pal relationship, it was an intellectual power play. Voltaire, always a fan of flattery, dubbed her the Star of the North, and in return, Catherine lapped up Enlightenment ideals like they were the latest fashion trend. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The reality was that Catherine had to juggle these progressive ideas with the iron-fisted rule expected of a Russian monarch. Take the Pugachev Rebellion of 1773-1775, for instance. Yemelyan Pugachev, a Cossack claiming to be the deceased Peter Roman III, led a massive peasant revolt that rattled Catherine's empire to its core. The uprising spread like wildfire across the Russian countryside, and Catherine's response was anything but enlightened. She crushed it with the same ruthlessness as a cat with a mouse, proving that when it came to maintaining order, she wasn't above using brute force. Economically, Catherine's reign was a mixed bag. She expanded the empire's borders through a series of military campaigns, gobbling up chunks of Poland, Crimea, and the Caucasus like a hungry hippo. This territorial expansion came with a hefty price tag. Wars aren't cheap, after all. Yet, these conquests also opened new trade routes and resources, fueling the empire's growth. Her economic policies were pragmatic, often favoring the nobility to keep them on her side, even if it meant the peasants remained shackled to the land like medieval serfs. Now, let's talk diplomacy. Catherine was a master of the art, balancing alliances with Europe's great powers like a tightrope walker with nerves of steel. She navigated the volatile landscape of 18th century geopolitics with finesse, all while projecting the image of a modern, enlightened ruler. Her foreign policy was a delicate dance, one that involved charming Western thinkers while keeping a firm grip on her empire's unruly elements. In the realm of education, Catherine made strides that were as ambitious as they were forward-thinking. She established the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens in 1764, the first state-financed higher education institution for women in Europe. This wasn't just about educating women. It was about creating a new class of educated elites who could help modernize Russia. Yet, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. These enlightened policies were enacted by an autocrat who held absolute power. Catherine's reign was a balancing act between the ideals of the Enlightenment and the autocratic realities of ruling an empire as vast and diverse as Russia. She was a ruler who garbled up philosophical treatises for breakfast, yet didn't hesitate to wield power with a firm hand when needed. Her story is a reminder that history's great figures often walk a fine line between myth and reality, and Catherine walked it with the grace of a ballerina on a tightrope. In the end, Catherine's reign was a testament to her ability to adapt and reinvent herself in a world that was constantly changing. She was a woman who embraced the new while never fully letting go of the old, a leader who understood that sometimes you had to mix enlightenment with a dash of despotism to get things done. Her legacy is as complex as the woman herself, a tapestry woven with ambition, intellect, and a fair share of ruthless pragmatism. So, as we pause on Catherine's story, remember that this is just another chapter in her saga, one that leaves us eager to see how she continued to shape Russia with a unique blend of charm and iron will. Stay tuned, because the tale of Catherine the Great is far from finished, and there's plenty more intrigue to unravel in the chapters to come. Catherine's story is like a tapestry, woven with strands of ambition, intellect, and a dash of scandal that keeps history buffs coming back for more. Let's chat about the juicy bits that often overshadow her political achievements, starting with the whispers of her romantic escapades. Legend has it that Catherine had 12 lovers, a number that might just be more fiction than fact, but it certainly spices up the history books. Now, before you start imagining her court as some sort of 18th century dating show, let's dig into the reality behind the rumors. Catherine was a savvy politician who wielded her personal relationships as tools for political advantage. Sure, she had lovers, but they were often influential figures who helped solidify her power base. Think Grigory Orlov, a military man who played a key role in her coup, or Prince Potemkin, a statesman and military leader who was perhaps her greatest confidant. These weren't just romantic flings, they were strategic alliances. In a world where a woman's power was often defined by her relationships, Catherine turned the tables and used her personal life to bolster her reign. It's a classic case of playing the hand you dealt with an expert poker face. Now, let's tackle the elephant, or should I say the horse, in the room. The infamous horse rumor is one of those myths that's more stubborn than a mule and just as absurd. The tale goes that Catherine died in a rather unorthodox manner involving a horse, but in reality, she passed away from a stroke in 1796 at the age of 67. So why does this bizarre story persist? Well, it's a testament to the enduring power of salacious gossip and the human penchant for scandal. The myth likely originated from her enemies, who sought to undermine her legacy with a tale so outrageous that it overshadowed the truth. It's a reminder that history isn't just written by the victors, it's also shaped by those with the juiciest stories. Despite the rumors and innuendo, Catherine's legacy is anchored in her real achievements. She expanded Russia's borders by over 200,000 square miles, a feat that required more than just charm and charisma. Her military campaigns, particularly the annexation of Crimea, reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe. Economically, she initiated reforms that modernized the Russian economy, promoting industry and agriculture in ways that laid the foundation for future growth. She also worked to improve Russia's infrastructure, investing in roads and canals that connected the vast empire like never before. Think of it as the 18th century version of broadband expansion, but with more horses and fewer cables. Catherine's reign wasn't just about territorial expansion and economic reform. It was also about cultural transformation. Her patronage of the arts turned Russia into a cultural powerhouse, with the Hermitage Museum standing as a monument to her vision. Under her rule, Russian literature and music flourished, setting the stage for the cultural renaissance that would make Russia a beacon of the arts in the 19th century. She was a woman who understood the power of soft diplomacy, using culture as a means to elevate Russia's status on the world stage. Yet, for all her accomplishments, Catherine's reign was also marked by contradictions. Her embrace of Enlightenment ideals often clashed with the autocratic nature of her rule. She corresponded with Voltaire and Diderot, yet suppressed uprisings with an iron fist when they threatened her power. Her efforts to reform the legal system and improve education were groundbreaking, but they often fell short in transforming the lives of the serfs who toiled under the harsh realities of feudalism. It's a paradox that highlights the complexity of her reign, a ruler who was both a progressive visionary and a pragmatic autocrat. As we reflect on Catherine's legacy, it's clear that she was a woman who defied easy categorization. Her story is a blend of romance and reality, myth and fact, ambition and pragmatism. She was a foreign-born outsider who became one of Russia's greatest rulers, a testament to her ability to adapt and excel in a world that was often hostile to women in power. Her reign set the stage for the modernization of Russia, leaving an indelible mark on the nation and the world. In the grand tapestry of history, Catherine the Great's thread is one of resilience, intelligence, and a fair share of audacity. She was a ruler who understood that power is rarely given. It must be seized, cultivated, and sometimes fiercely protected. Her story is a reminder that the past is as much about the people who lived it as it is about the myths we create. Catherine's legacy endures not just in the annals of history, but in the enduring fascination with a woman who dared to dream big and, more importantly, made those dreams a reality. So, as we wrap up our journey through Catherine's life, let's leave with a final thought. History is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of stories, each one adding depth and color to our understanding of the past. Catherine the Great was a master of this complexity, a ruler who navigated the turbulent waters of her time with a blend of charm, cunning, and a touch of the theatrical. Her story is far from over, as her legacy continues to inspire and intrigue, reminding us that even in the annals of history, there's always room for a bit of grandeur. Deep in the heart of Southeast Asia, where today's travelers might be caught Instagramming in the shadow of ancient stones, the Khmer Empire once asked a question that would echo through the ages. How do you transform a jungle into a metropolis? The answer, apparently, was both a lot of ambition and an absolute disregard for the logistical challenges of the medieval era. Welcome to the story of the 9th century establishment of Angkor as the capital of an empire that was as grand in vision as it was formidable in execution. Let's set the scene. It's the early 800s, and the Khmer Empire, with its roots in modern-day Cambodia, is gearing up to announce its presence with a capital that would make even the most lavish of Game of Thrones cities look like a pop-up tent. At the helm of this grand endeavor was King Jayavarman Roman II, the guy who decided that if you're going to rule the jungles, you might as well do it in style. Now, building a monumental city in the middle of a rainforest isn't exactly like putting up a treehouse in your backyard. We're talking about hauling massive stones, some weighing over a ton, through dense foliage, swamps, and across rivers. And all this without the luxury of modern-day machinery or, heaven forbid, GPS. Imagine trying to organize a construction site where the main tools are elephants, the workforce is vast, and the motivational speeches don't include promises of high-speed internet. But why would anyone go through such Herculean efforts? The answer lies in a potent mix of economic and political motivations. The Khmer leaders weren't just trying to build a city. They were crafting a symbol of power and prosperity that could rival any in the world. Angkor wasn't just meant to be a home for the rulers. It was a statement of divine kingship, a hub for trade, and a demonstration of the empire's capacity to harness nature itself. The economic incentives were clear. The region was rich in resources and strategically positioned along trade routes that connected the vast Indian Ocean network. By establishing a capital at Angkor, the Khmer could control the flow of goods and people, much like a savvy investor might corner the market on a lucrative stock. This control translated into wealth, influence, and an increased ability to fund even grander projects. Politically, Angkor was a unifying force. By building a city that could house thousands, the Khmer leaders centralized their power, bringing together disparate regions and cultures under one roof, or in this case, one expansive network of sandstone and laterite. It was as much about creating a center of governance as it was about constructing an awe-inspiring religious and cultural landmark. Yet, despite the grandeur and glory, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer human endeavor involved. Imagine the conversations at the time. Hey, could you pass me that ton of sandstone? Sure, but only if you help me drag it through this snake-infested swamp. It's a testament to human determination, or perhaps stubbornness, that this project ever got off the ground. In this medieval masterpiece, water played the role of both ally and antagonist. The Khmer were masters of hydraulic engineering, using an intricate system of canals, reservoirs, or barrays, and moats not just for irrigation, but also as a crucial part of the city's architecture. These waterworks enabled the city to support its population, making Angkor a bustling urban center at a time when much of Europe was still recovering from the fall of the Roman Empire. But while the romantic in us might revel in the idea of a lost city rising majestically from the jungle, the reality was far more sweaty and mosquito-infested. The labor force, likely comprised of conscripted workers and slaves, toiled under the relentless Southeast Asian sun, their efforts transforming dense forests into a sprawling cityscape that stretched over 1,000 square kilometers. And all this without the promise of a nice cold drink at the end of the day. So how did the Khmer rulers convince thousands of people to embark on this architectural odyssey? It wasn't with promises of fame or fortune. Instead, it was the intertwined allure of religion and power. The king was not just a ruler. He was seen as a divine figure, a god king whose vision was imbued with spiritual significance. By participating in the construction of Angkor, Workers were contributing to a sacred mission, ensuring both the glory of the empire and their place in the cosmic order. In the grand scheme, Angkor was more than just a capital city. It was a testament to the might and ingenuity of the Khmer Empire, a place where politics, economics, and religion converged to create one of the most remarkable feats of the ancient world. And while today we might marvel at the sheer scale and beauty of its ruins, let's not forget the backbreaking labor that went into every stone, every canal, every inch of this jungle wonder. So the next time you find yourself lost in the beauty of Angkor's temples, spare a thought for those medieval logistics wizards who managed to build a skyscraper with Stone Age tools, and did it all in the pursuit of a vision that has stood the test of time. While you're contemplating the sweat and sinew that went into Angkor's sprawling metropolis, let's zoom in on its crown jewel, Angkor Wat. This isn't your average temple. It's more like the medieval equivalent of a space station, constructed with an ambition that would make even today's architects clutch their blueprints in awe. Built in the early 12th century under the reign of King Suryavarman II, Angkor Wat is the kind of engineering marvel that prompts both jaw-dropping wonder and a fair bit of head-scratching. Let's talk numbers, because what's impressive without some serious stats to back it up? Angkor Wat was constructed using over 5 million tons of sandstone. That's enough stone to build a wall around the moon, or a temple complex that spans 6 hectares, which is roughly the size of 300 football fields. Yes, you heard that right. This wasn't just a place of worship. It was a statement so grand it practically shouted, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." And then there's the moat. Oh, the moat. Forget the romantic notion of a tranquil water feature. This was a defensive barrier that would make any would-be invader reconsider their life choices. Stretching 200 meters wide and 4 kilometers long, it required a volume of water that could fill 60,000 Olympic swimming pools. Now, I'm no moat specialist, but that's enough liquid real estate to make any dragon, mythical or otherwise, feel right at home. But hang on a second, because we have to address the branding genius of the Khmer Empire. Angkor Wat is often referred to as a temple mountain. While that sounds suitably epic, it's a bit of an understatement. With its 5 central towers soaring nearly 65 meters, it's a structure that feels more like its own planet. If Mars had temples, they'd probably look like this. The Khmer weren't just stacking stones. They were building a cosmic link between heaven and earth, a celestial skyscraper in the midst of the jungle. Now, let's ponder the human cost of this celestial ambition. The labor force required to build Angkor Wat was immense. A small city's worth of workers all sweating it out in the tropical heat. These weren't craftsmen working for personal glory. Many were conscripted laborers, likely a mix of skilled artisans, peasants, and slaves. Imagine being told your next few years would involve lugging blocks of sandstone heavier than a grand piano, with the added bonus of malaria-carrying mosquitoes as your constant companions. Oh, and no weekends off. And why, you might ask, did the Khmer go to such lengths? Well, much like the social media influencers of today, it was all about the followers, or in this case, the divine endorsement. Angkor Wat wasn't just a place to park your prayers. It was a testament to the divine right of Suryavarman II, who was not just a king, but a god king. By aligning himself with the Hindu god Vishnu, Suryavarman was making a celestial power play, suggesting that his reign was just as eternal and unshakable as the deity himself. But here's the twist. While Angkor Wat's religious significance is undeniable, its functionality was just as pragmatic. The temple complex wasn't just a religious site. It was the epicenter of Khmer society, economy, and politics. Think of it as the Vatican, Wall Street, and the United Nations all rolled into one. The temple wasn't just a place for spiritual enlightenment. It was a hub for trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Of course, the Khmer's PR department was working overtime to ensure that Angkor Wat was seen as the pinnacle of architectural and spiritual achievement. The sheer scale and beauty of the temple were meant to awe and inspire, to serve as a constant reminder of the empire's glory and the king's divine mandate. It was a propaganda machine made of stone, and it worked. However, while the legend of Angkor Wat is a tale of divine inspiration and monumental achievement, the reality was a bit grittier. The construction of such a colossal structure required not only immense human labor, but also an intricate understanding of engineering and architecture. The Khmer were masters of their craft, employing advanced techniques to ensure the stability and longevity of their creations. They used a grid system to align the temple with the cardinal points, and the sandstone blocks were fitted together with such precision that they didn't need mortar. And let's not forget the sophisticated hydraulic system that supported the temple, ensuring it could withstand the region's seasonal monsoons. In the end, Angkor Wat is a testament to the Khmer Empire's unparalleled ambition and ingenuity. It's a story of divine kingship and political power, of economic strategy and architectural mastery. It's a reminder that while the jungle may have swallowed much of the empire, the legacy of its greatest achievement still stands, a testament to human creativity and determination. But stay tuned, because the story of Angkor doesn't end here. There's more intrigue, more innovation, and yes, more stone. So much more stone to come. And speaking of stones, let's not forget Angkor Wat's less glamorous, but equally impressive sibling, Angkor Thom. This isn't just another temple complex. It's more like the medieval version of a bustling metropolis, the downtown to Angkor Wat's uptown. Picture a city that was the literal heart of the Khmer Empire in the 13th century, sprawling over 9 square kilometers. That's about the size of Central Park. And no, it didn't come with horse-drawn carriages or overpriced hot dogs. Angkor Thom was the brainchild of King Jayavarman VII, a ruler with a penchant for urban planning. If Angkor Wat was the empire's statement piece, Angkor Thom was its masterclass in city management. Imagine a place where civic planning wasn't just an afterthought, but a meticulous blueprint etched into stone. The city was structured around the Bayon Temple, not just as a religious center, but as the axis mundi, the center of the universe, if you will. Now, let's talk infrastructure, because what's a city without its plumbing? Angkor Thom was a marvel of hydraulic engineering, boasting an elaborate water management system that would make any modern urban planner blush. The Khmer didn't have the luxury of Google Maps or urban planning software, yet they managed to carve out a city with roads, canals, and reservoirs, or barrays, that kept the city hydrated and navigable. These weren't just decorative ponds. They were essential for irrigation, drinking water, and yes, even city defense. And here's where the Khmer Empire really flexed its engineering muscles. The roads in Angkor Thom were not your average dirt paths. They were designed for efficiency, lined with laterite and sandstone, capable of handling elephant traffic. Just picture it, a jam-packed street with elephants lumbering along, probably causing as much frustration as a modern-day Monday morning rush hour. And let's face it, getting stuck behind a herd of pachyderms is a different kind of road rage experience. But why go to such lengths? The answer is both pragmatic and symbolic. Angkor Thom was intended to be a statement of Jayavarman VII ambition and benevolence, a city that could support and sustain its populous empire. It was a place where the practicalities of city living met the grandeur of imperial vision. With a population estimated at nearly 1 million at its peak, Angkor Thom was the medieval equivalent of a megacity, a thriving hub of commerce, culture, and politics. And then there were the public works. The Khmer were not just about temples and palaces. They invested heavily in infrastructure that supported everyday life. Hospitals, rest houses, and schools dotted the landscape, all part of Jayavarman VII's grand plan to improve the quality of life for his subjects. This wasn't just altruism, it was smart governance. By ensuring the well-being of the population, Jayavarman VII was solidifying his rule and the stability of his empire. Of course, with every sprawling city comes the darker side of urbanization. While we might romanticize the grandeur of Angkor Thom, living there wasn't all divine architecture and serene temple walks. The city was crowded, noisy, and likely quite smelly. A far cry from the idyllic vision we might imagine. Sanitation would have been a constant challenge, and the threat of disease ever present in the tropical climate. But hey, at least they didn't have to deal with honking taxis or air pollution. Right. The Khmer's urban planning prowess also included an awareness of environmental sustainability that feels surprisingly modern. They understood the need to balance human activity with nature, using the landscape to their advantage rather than bulldozing it into submission. The city's layout reflected a deep understanding of geography and climate, harnessing the monsoon rains to fill their reservoirs and canals. It's a lesson in ecological harmony that feels all too relevant today, as we grapple with our own urban challenges. Now, let's sprinkle in some economic context, because what's a city without a thriving economy? Angkor was a bustling center for trade, strategically positioned along key routes that connected the Khmer Empire to China, India, and beyond. The city was a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and goods, a medieval marketplace where merchants haggled over silk, spices, and precious stones. It was the kind of place where you could hear a dozen languages spoken in a single day, each transaction a pulse beat in the empire's economic heart. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality of Angkor grandeur was built on the backs of thousands of laborers, many of whom were conscripted or enslaved. The city's splendor came at a human cost, a fact often glossed over in the romantic retellings of its history. While the empire's leaders were busy crafting their legacy, the workers were left to toil in the relentless sun, their contributions to the city's splendor often forgotten in the annals of history. As with any urban center, Angkor was a place of contradictions, a city of divine ambition and earthly toil, of spiritual enlightenment and practical necessity. It was a place where the grandeur of the Khmer Empire was on full display, yet the everyday struggles of its inhabitants were all too real. In the grand tapestry of history, Angkor stands as a testament to the Khmer Empire's capacity for innovation and its vision of a harmonious urban landscape. It's a reminder that while the challenges of city life are timeless, so too are the solutions. Whether navigating the elephant traffic of the 13th century or the SUV gridlocks of today, the human desire to build, connect, and thrive remains unchanged. And as we delve deeper into the story of the Khmer, the tale of Angkor leaves us eagerly anticipating the next chapter in this epic saga of stone and ambition. Stay tuned for more medieval urban planning adventures, because this empire's story is far from over. And while Angkor laid the groundwork for a bustling empire, let's dig into the myths and realities of this so-called Golden Age, a term that's been tossed around with all the accuracy of a medieval catapult. Yes, the Khmer Empire was impressive, but the romanticized image of an endlessly prosperous era is about as accurate as a Hollywood history biopic. First, let's talk about those lush depictions of opulence and prosperity, the kind that make you think the Khmer were living in a never-ending episode of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, Ancient Edition. Archaeological evidence, however, paints a somewhat different picture. While the empire did enjoy periods of wealth, it was also a society constantly wrestling with environmental challenges and resource management, much like a modern city grapples with rush hour and recycling. Water, for instance, was both a boon and a bane. The Khmer were brilliant at exploiting the monsoon cycle through their advanced hydraulic engineering, but this system was also a house of cards. The empire's prosperity was heavily dependent on its ability to control water. In dry years, the intricate network of canals and reservoirs worked wonders. But when the rains were too heavy or too light, the whole system could, and did, come crashing down. Think of it like relying on a shaky Wi-Fi connection. When it's good, it's great, but when it's bad, your Netflix binge is toast. And let's not forget the role of propaganda in all this. The Khmer rulers were master spin doctors, ensuring their achievements were as immortal as their sandstone creations. Their inscriptions and bas-reliefs were less historical record and more medieval marketing campaign. These stone-carved stories were a blend of fact and fiction, designed to cement the rulers' divine status and justify their grandiose projects. It's akin to a modern politician's Twitter feed, where the highlight reel often obscures the messy behind-the-scenes reality. The romantic tales of the Khmer's Golden Age often gloss over the grittier aspects of empire management, the kind that doesn't make it onto postcards. The empire's expansion, for instance, was as much about strategic land and resource acquisition as it was about culture and civilization. Every new territory meant more resources, more people to tax, and perhaps most crucially, more land to feed the empire's ever-growing population. But this territorial ambition came with its own set of challenges, like defending a sprawling domain against external threats and internal strife. Economics also played a starring role in the empire's narrative. While the Khmer reaped the benefits of being a trade hub, they weren't immune to the pitfalls of economic fluctuation. Trade routes that once brought wealth could just as easily dry up, leaving the empire scrambling for alternatives. It's the ancient equivalent of a stock market crash. One day you're riding high, the next you're selling your elephants to make ends meet. And what about the daily grind for the average Khmer citizen? The empire's prosperity didn't trickle down as easily as the water through their canals. While the elites basked in the glow of Angkor's architectural marvels, the common folk often faced a life of laborious toil, subsisting on agriculture and small-scale trade. The glamour of the empire's capital was a world away from the reality of rural life, where a failed harvest could mean the difference between survival and starvation. Now let's tackle the elephant in the room, or rather, the elephant-shaped hole in the narrative, the empire's decline. The romanticized image of a sudden, mysterious collapse is as tempting as a good mystery novel, but the truth is far less dramatic. The decline of the Khmer Empire was a slow, messy process, a combination of ecological strain, economic hardship, and political fragmentation. As we've seen, the Khmer's reliance on their intricate water management system was both their greatest strength and their Achilles heel. Over time, deforestation and overuse led to soil degradation, reducing agricultural productivity. This environmental stress, coupled with increasingly erratic weather patterns, put immense pressure on the empire's resources. Politically, the empire was not immune to the age-old problem of succession disputes and court intrigue. Power struggles among the elite weakened central authority, making it difficult to respond effectively to external threats and internal challenges. Result: a slow erosion of power that left the once mighty empire vulnerable. And yet, despite these challenges, the Khmer legacy endures. The ruins of Angkor, with their enigmatic smiles and towering spires, continue to captivate the imagination. They stand as a testament to human creativity and ambition, a reminder of a society that reached for the stars with both hands, even when one was tied behind its back. As we continue our journey through the annals of the Khmer Empire, remember that history is rarely as straightforward as it seems. Behind every grand narrative lies a tapestry of triumphs and trials, a story as complex and layered as the society it seeks to portray. Stay tuned as we uncover more about this fascinating civilization where every stone tells a tale and every tale reveals a deeper truth. And so, as the dust of history settles, we're left with the legacy of Khmer architecture, a legacy that continues to stand tall, literally, in the form of Angkor's awe-inspiring structures. These are not just relics of a bygone era, they are monuments to human ingenuity and resilience. And here's the kicker: many of these ancient wonders have outlasted modern buildings, proving that sometimes the past really does know best. It's a bit like finding out your grandma's old casserole recipe is actually the secret to Michelin star success. Let's take a moment to appreciate the irony here. In an age where glass towers and steel giants dominate our skylines, often requiring constant maintenance and occasional facelifts, the Khmer's sandstone creations have weathered the centuries with a stoic grace. Angkor Wat, Angkor Thom, and their stone siblings have endured monsoons, invasions, and the relentless creep of jungle vines, outlasting countless modern structures that crumble under far less. What's the secret sauce, you ask? Well, the Khmer had a knack for sustainability that makes even the greenest of today's architects look like they're still using plastic straws. By harnessing local materials and working with, rather than against, the natural environment, they created buildings that were both durable and in harmony with their surroundings. It's a lesson in architectural humility, an approach that values longevity over the instant gratification of glossy facades. Now, let's talk about adaptation. While the Khmer Empire itself may have faded, the principles behind its architecture continue to inspire. The Khmer were masters of adaptation, constantly evolving their designs to meet the challenges of their environment. By studying the shifting patterns of water and weather, they refined their hydraulic systems, ensuring their cities thrived even amid environmental fluctuations. It's the kind of forward thinking that makes you wonder why they didn't have their own version of TED talks. But let's not romanticize too much. As we admire the Khmer's architectural feats, it's important to remember the human cost, the laborers who toiled under the hot sun, the resources extracted from the earth, the societal pressures that drove their ambitions. The grandeur of Angkor was not without sacrifice, reminder that even the most beautiful edifices are built on a foundation of sweat and struggle. Yet, despite the harsh realities, there's something undeniably captivating about Angkor's ruins. a mystery that draws historians and tourists alike. Perhaps it's the enigmatic smiles of the Bayan faces, or the intricate bas-reliefs whispering tales of gods and kings. Maybe it's the sheer audacity of it all, the fact that an empire once dared to dream so big in the heart of a jungle. Whatever the reason, Angkor remains a beacon of fascination, a place where history feels alive and questions linger in the air like the scent of frangipani. This enduring allure is what keeps the story of the Khmer Empire alive, inviting us to explore not just its stones, but the stories they tell. And as we wander through the vine-clad corridors and sun-dappled courtyards, we're reminded that history is a living thing, shaped by those who came before and those who continue to seek its secrets. It's a narrative both grand and gritty, a testament to human ambition and the eternal quest for meaning. So, as we wrap up this journey through the annals of the Khmer Empire, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons it offers. The story of Angkor is one of vision and endurance, of triumphs and trials. It's a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, their legacies can endure, etched in stone and memory. And as we face our own challenges in a rapidly changing world, perhaps we can draw inspiration from the past, learning not just from the grandeur of Angkor's temples, but also from the resilience and adaptability of the people who built them. In the end, the Khmer Empire's legacy is not just the stones it left behind, but the stories those stones continue to tell. Stories of ambition and adaptation, of human creativity, and the indomitable spirit of a civilization that dared to dream. And as long as there are those willing to listen, Angkor's mysteries will continue to captivate, inspire, and remind us of the timeless dance between humanity and the world it inhabits. So here's to the Khmer, the original architects of awe, and to the stories that endure as long as we are willing to remember. In the bustling town of Tavistock, England, where sheep outnumbered people and mud was as much a part of the landscape as the rolling hills, a boy named Francis Drake was born in 1540. No, he didn't spring into the world clutching a compass and muttering sea shanties. Like most legends, his story starts with humble beginnings. Drake was the eldest of 12 sons. Yes, 12. And if that doesn't earn you some early grit, nothing will. The family's Protestant faith made them unpopular under the Catholic reign of Queen Mary I, forcing them to flee to Kent. There, Drake's father worked as a preacher, while young Francis likely dreamed of anything that didn't involve sermons or sibling squabbles. Fast forward a few years, and Drake's life took a turn for the salty. At the tender age of 12, or thereabouts, he was apprenticed to a merchant sailing the coastal waters. In those days, a sailor's life wasn't the romantic escapade of pirate lore. It was more about avoiding scurvy and surviving storms than finding buried treasure. But young Drake had salt water in his veins and quickly learned the ropes, literally. By his early 20s, he was commanding a ship himself. His first taste of real adventure came under the wing of his cousin, John Hawkins, a man who wasn't exactly known for his gentle demeanor or lawful enterprises. Joining Hawkins' expedition to the New World was like enrolling in the school of hard nautical narcs. The mission, slave trading, a grim practice, to say the least, but part of the harsh economic realities of the time. Drake got first-hand experience in the brutal trade winds that blew between Africa and the Americas, learning the routes and the ruthless business. On one voyage in 1568, things went south in a spectacularly disastrous way. The fleet was ambushed by the Spanish at San Juan de Ulua, off the coast of Mexico. Outnumbered and outgunned, Drake and the crew barely escaped with their lives, leaving behind a burning wreck of dreams and ships. But here's the twist. Instead of a cautionary tale, this experience lit a fire in Drake's belly. The Spanish had made an enemy for life. Cue the vengeful expeditions and treasure hunts that would cement his reputation. Drake wasn't just driven by revenge, though. Economic necessity played a starring role. England was no superpower in the 16th century. It was more like the scrappy underdog, eager to swipe at the heels of the Spanish giant. Drake's missions were as much about lining his pockets, and those of Queen Elizabeth I, as they were about personal vendettas. Let's not gloss over the less-than-glamorous side of his early voyages. Picture this: cramped quarters, a diet consisting of hardtack, which was basically a brick of flour and water, and the delightful company of rats and lice. And let's talk fashion, or the lack thereof. Elizabethan sailors weren't strutting around in dashing uniforms. Think more along the lines of practical, somewhat ragged garments that were more about function than style. The iconic ruffled collars and feathered hats, those were for landlubbers with time and money to waste. Drake's early encounters with the New World were a mixed bag of awe and adversity. The vastness of the Atlantic, the lush, foreign landscapes of the Americas, and the glittering promise of Spanish gold were as intoxicating as they were treacherous. But each voyage honed his skills and steeled his resolve. By the time he returned to England, battle-scarred and salty, he was more than ready to carve his name into the history books and possibly into a few Spanish galleons. In a world where life expectancy was more a suggestion than a guarantee, Drake's survival and subsequent success were nothing short of remarkable. His early years were a crucible, shaping a man who would go on to challenge the might of Spain and become a national hero, or a notorious pirate, depending on whom you asked. As he stood on the cusp of his legendary circumnavigation, it was clear Sir Francis Drake's journey was just beginning, and if the Spanish thought they'd seen the last of him, they were in for a surprise as big as the New World itself. And so, with a belly full of vengeance and a heart hungry for gold, Sir Francis Drake set sail on a path that would bring him into the crosshairs of the Spanish Empire and into the history books as the quintessential privateer, or, to the Spanish, the ultimate pirate nuisance. The line between privateer and pirate was as thin as a piece of hardtack, and Drake danced on it like a seasoned pro. With Queen Elizabeth's tacit blessing and a license that was as much a get-out-of-jail-free card as it was an endorsement of piracy, Drake embarked on a series of bold raids that would make Johnny Depp's Captain Jack Sparrow look like a choir boy. Now, let's dispel a myth right off the bat. Drake wasn't some romantic swashbuckler swinging from ship to ship with a rose between his teeth. Nope. The reality was far grittier. He was part of a state-sponsored economic war, where capturing enemy ships and plundering settlements was just another day at the office. The Spanish, with their glittering New World riches, were the perfect target. And Drake, well, he was the guy who showed up at the Spanish treasure parties uninvited, unannounced, and certainly unwelcome. Take his infamous raid on Nombre de Dios in 1572, for instance. Drake and his crew, a ragtag mix of sailors and soldiers, landed on the Isthmus of Panama under the cover of darkness. Their mission, to relieve the Spanish of some of their ill-gotten gold. And by some, I mean as much as their ships could carry. The raid was a masterpiece of audacity. Drake and his men stormed the town, and though he was injured in the process, taking a musket ball to the leg, he pressed on. Talk about commitment to the cause. They didn't make off with the entire Spanish treasure fleet that day, but they did nab a nice chunk of change. Enough to put a smile on Drake's face and a frown on King Philip Roman II. Drake's raids were as much about economics as they were about bravado. The Spanish treasure fleets were the lifeblood of their empire, ferrying gold and silver from the Americas back to Spain. By hitting these fleets, Drake wasn't just lining his own pockets, though he certainly did that. He was striking at the very heart of Spanish power, and he did it with a mix of cunning strategy and sheer nerve that left the Spanish scrambling and the English cheering. But let's not paint Drake as some Robin Hood figure. The man was in it for the loot, plain and simple. And while Queen Elizabeth liked to pretend that she was shocked, I tell you, by his piratical antics, she was more than happy to enjoy her cut of the spoils. After all, England's coffers weren't exactly overflowing, and Drake's exploits brought in much-needed funds. It was a win-win situation, except for the Spanish, who were left wondering why their ships seemed to have a Drake-shaped hole in them. In 1573, Drake pulled off another audacious feat, the capture of the Spanish silver train in Panama. This wasn't a train in the steam engine sense, but a caravan of mules laden with silver from Peru, making its way across the isthmus. Drake and his men ambushed the caravan, capturing over 20 tons of silver. That's right, 20 tons. To put that in perspective, that's about the weight of 3 adult African elephants. Imagine trying to sneak those out of the jungle. Of course, all this success came with its fair share of danger. The Spanish were not amused, to put it mildly. They put a hefty price on Drake's head, making him one of the most wanted men in the empire. And while the English crown couldn't officially sanction piracy, their privateering licenses provided just enough plausible deniability to keep the delicate diplomatic dance between England and Spain from turning into an all-out war, at least for the time being. Let's take a moment to appreciate the economic ecosystem of piracy. It wasn't just about treasure chests and pieces of eight. Piracy was a business, and like any business, it had its overheads. Ships had to be maintained, crews paid, and bribes. Incentives, distributed to keep everyone happy. Drake's raids were as much about managing logistics and resources as they were about swashbuckling heroics. And while his actions may seem daring and romantic from a distance, up close they were a grind of planning, execution, and occasionally improvisation when things went south. The political climate of the time was a powder keg with a very short fuse. England and Spain were locked in a struggle for dominance, and Drake's raids were a thorn in Spain's side. But they were also a reminder that England, though smaller and less wealthy, was not to be underestimated. Drake's feats were a psychological blow to the Spanish, a reminder that their empire was not as invincible as they liked to believe. As Drake's reputation grew, so did his list of enemies. But so did his cache of admirers back home, where tales of his daring deeds were told with a mix of awe and envy. He became a folk hero, a symbol of English resilience and audacity. And while the Spanish may have cursed his name, the English toasted to his health, often with ale bought with his ill-gotten gains. So, was Drake a hero or a villain? The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. His actions were driven as much by the economic realities of the time as by personal ambition and a thirst for adventure. He was a product of his era, a time when the lines between legality and piracy were blurred by necessity and opportunity. And while the myth of the gallant Drake remains, the reality is far more complex and far more human. As we sail forward into the next chapter of his life, keep in mind that beneath the legendary exterior was a man navigating the turbulent waters of politics, economics, and survival in a world where the stakes were as high as the seas were wide. With the sea breeze of fortune at his back and a thirst for audacity that could not be quenched, Sir Francis Drake set sail on what would become one of the most legendary journeys in maritime history, his circumnavigation of the globe. Let's be real here. This wasn't some leisurely cruise with all-you-can-eat buffets and shuffleboard on the Lido deck. This was an epic slog covering 36,000 miles over 3 grueling years, from 1577 to 1580, fraught with peril, political intrigue, and the constant threat of meeting a watery end. Drake's journey began with a fleet of 5 ships, including his flagship, the Pelican, which he would later rename the Golden Hind. Now, one might think 5 ships would be enough to tackle the high seas and whatever unfortunate Spanish galleon might cross their path. But this voyage was more about survival against the elements than swashbuckling theatrics. By the time he returned, only the Golden Hind remained, a testament to the voyage challenges and the grim realities of 16th century seafaring. Let's talk logistics. Imagine planning a road trip around the world, but instead of highways, you've got nothing but the vast, unpredictable ocean. Navigation was more art than science, relying on the stars, rudimentary maps, and a healthy dose of guesswork. There were no GPS systems to tell you to recalculate when you took a wrong turn into pirate-infested waters. And then there were the supplies. Drake had to stockpile enough food and fresh water to last the journey, knowing full well that spoilage and storms could turn his carefully laid plans into chaos. Drake's fleet initially headed down the coast of Africa, then crossed the Atlantic. They faced down the treacherous waters of the Magellan Strait at the southern tip of South America, where the waves were as monstrous as the tales that sailors spun. Here, the fleet was reduced to just 2 ships after storms and desertion took their toll. It was a brutal reminder that the ocean was an unforgiving master. As they entered the Pacific, the renamed Golden Hind sailed north along the coast of South America. Drake's crew raided Spanish settlements and captured treasure-laden ships, amassing a fortune in gold, silver, and jewels. These raids were not merely acts of piracy, but strategic strikes intended to weaken the Spanish Empire and fatten English coffers. One of the most infamous of these was the capture of the Cacafugo, a Spanish galleon bursting at the seams with wealth. Imagine the jackpot sound of a slot machine, but instead of coins, it was gold ingots clattering onto the deck. Throughout these exploits, Drake maintained a delicate balance between pirate and privateer, always conscious of his standing with Queen Elizabeth I. Her tacit approval was his shield against being labeled a pirate outright, and her share of the spoils was the price of that protection. Elizabeth was, after all, pragmatic about her financials, with Spain's King Philip Roman II breathing fire and threatening to retaliate against English interests. Drake's successes were a thorn in the side of Spanish pride and a triumph for English ambition. But the journey wasn't all treasure and triumph. Drake faced mutinies, navigational nightmares, and the ever-present threat of disease. Scurvy, the dreaded sailor's scourge, was a constant companion, turning gums black and spirits bleak. Yet somehow, Drake managed to keep his crew relatively intact, a testament to his leadership skills, and perhaps a bit of luck. Drake's circumnavigation was about more than gold and glory. It was a statement of England's rising power and the shifting dynamics of global politics. The voyage demonstrated that the Spanish monopoly on the New World could be challenged, and that English seamen could rival their continental counterparts in daring and expertise. This wasn't just a victory for Drake. It was a shot across the bow of the Spanish Empire, a clear signal that England intended to play hardball on the world stage. As Drake returned to England in 1580, the Golden Hind was laden with enough treasure to spark both celebration and controversy. Queen Elizabeth, ever the shrewd monarch, was quick to capitalize on Drake's success. She had him knighted aboard the Golden Hind, a gesture that sent a clear message to Spain. Drake's actions had the crown's tacit approval. Sir Francis Drake was now not just a privateer or pirate, but a knight of the realm, his reputation cemented as one of the most audacious seafarers of the age. Of course, the Spanish were less than thrilled with this turn of events. To them, Drake was little more than a glorified pirate, a thief who dared to plunder their empire's riches and humiliate their naval prowess. But Elizabeth, ever the diplomat, knew that Drake's actions, while controversial, had strengthened England's position both economically and strategically. Drake's circumnavigation had a profound impact on global trade and exploration. It opened new routes for English merchants and inspired a wave of expeditions that would eventually lead to the establishment of colonies and trading posts around the world. The economic ripples of Drake's journey were felt far and wide, transforming England from a peripheral player into a formidable maritime power. But let's not get too romantic about it. The realities of the voyage were harsh, and the human cost was significant. Of the original crew, many perished from disease, shipwrecks, and battles. The journey was a crucible, testing the limits of human endurance and the boundaries of maritime exploration. It was a bold gamble, fraught with risk, but driven by the lure of riches and the promise of glory. Drake's circumnavigation stands as a testament to the spirit of an age where exploration was as much about conquest as it was about discovery. The line between hero and villain was often blurred, shaped by perspective and politics. For England, Drake was a national hero, a symbol of defiance and ambition. For Spain, he was a scourge on the seas, a reminder of the vulnerabilities of their empire. As we reflect on Drake's legendary voyage, it's clear that his story is more than just a tale of high-seas adventure. It's a narrative woven into the fabric of history, illustrating the complex interplay of power, ambition, and exploration that defined the Elizabethan era. Drake's circumnavigation was not just a journey around the globe. It was a voyage into the heart of an empire, a daring dance on the edge of the known world, and a bold assertion of England's place within it. And so, with a legacy as expansive as the oceans he traversed, Sir Francis Drake sails into the annals of history, leaving behind a trail of tales as wide and deep as the seas he conquered. His circumnavigation was a defining moment in the age of exploration, setting the stage for future voyages and shaping the course of history in ways that continue to resonate today. But, as any good storyteller knows, this is far from the end. Drake's adventures on the high seas are just one chapter in a much larger story, a saga of exploration, empire, and the relentless pursuit of the unknown. As Sir Francis Drake etched his name into the annals of maritime legend, his story was far from over. Sure, he'd circumnavigated the globe and thumbed his nose at the Spanish crown, but the next chapter in his life would be a mix of glory and blunder that could give even the most seasoned adventurer whiplash. By the late 1580, Drake was as much a celebrity as he was a sailor, and with fame came the expectation to deliver on the big stage. Enter the Spanish Armada of 1588, a showdown that was less about chivalric duels and more about the gritty reality of naval warfare. Drake's involvement in the defeat of the Armada is the stuff of legend, complete with a scene that's been milked for all its theatrical worth. Picture this. It's a sunny day in Plymouth, and Drake is casually finishing a game of bowls on the green, seemingly unfazed by the arrival of the Spanish fleet. When told of the impending attack, he allegedly remarked, "There's plenty of time to finish the game and still defeat the Spaniards." Now, whether he actually said this is up for debate. After all, stories tend to grow legs and start jogging well before history can catch up. But what's undeniable is the cool confidence he exuded, a mix of bravado and strategy that would make any modern sports coach proud. The Spanish Armada was a beast of a fleet, with 130 ships and a mission to escort an army to invade England. The stakes were as high as a cat's back, and the political implications were enormous. If Spain succeeded, England's autonomy and Protestantism would be in serious jeopardy. But Drake and his contemporaries were not about to let that happen. With a fleet of around 200 smaller, more maneuverable ships, the English had a distinct advantage in agility. Think of it as a classic David and Goliath scenario, but with more cannonballs and less divine intervention. One of Drake's more innovative contributions was the use of fire ships, vessels set ablaze and sent drifting into the tightly packed Spanish fleet. It was a move as audacious as it was destructive, causing chaos among the Spanish ranks and breaking their formation. This was no accident. It was a calculated risk that played to English strengths and Spanish weaknesses. The maneuver was a masterclass in naval tactics, a reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. In the end, the Spanish Armada was battered not just by English might, but by the infamous British weather, storms doing as much damage as cannon fire. When the dust and rain settled, England emerged victorious, and Drake's reputation was burnished to a golden sheen. But fame, as they say, is a fickle mistress. Just like a fair-weather friend, it's there when the sun shines, but nowhere to be found when clouds gather. Drake's subsequent expeditions would test this theory in spectacular fashion. Take his ventures in the Caribbean during the 1590s, for example. These missions were less about national defense and more about lining pockets, a pirate's retirement plan, if you will. Yet they were a far cry from the triumphs of his earlier years. The ill-fated expedition of 1595 was particularly disastrous. Drake, now in his mid-50s and perhaps a bit past his prime, set sail with the intention of capturing Spanish settlements and treasure ships. But things quickly went south, literally and figuratively. The element of surprise was lost, and the Spanish, having learned a thing or two from past encounters, were better prepared. The expedition was plagued by disease, poor planning, and internal discord. Out of an initial force of 27 ships, only a handful returned. It was a hard pill to swallow for a man accustomed to success, a reminder that the seas he once mastered could still turn treacherous. Drake's reputation took a hit, and not just among his enemies. His contemporaries began to question whether he still had the edge that made him a legend. In truth, the decline was as much about changing times as it was about personal failings. By the late 16th century, the nature of naval warfare and exploration was shifting. The world was becoming a more complicated place, with alliances and politics playing a larger role than ever before. The days of lone wolf adventurers striking out for fame and fortune were giving way to more organized, state-sponsored enterprises. Drake, a relic of an earlier age, found himself navigating these uncharted waters with less certainty than before. Economically, the expeditions were a bust, failing to deliver the promised returns. The cost of mounting such ventures was enormous, with ships, supplies, and manpower draining resources that could ill afford to be wasted. It was a sobering lesson in the harsh realities of maritime economics, a world where profit and loss could make or break reputations as surely as cannonballs shattered hulls. Yet, even in his later years, Drake's spirit remained undiminished. He continued to sail, driven by the same fire that had fueled his early exploits. But time, that relentless adversary, was catching up. On January 28, 1596, while anchored off the coast of Panama, Drake succumbed to dysentery, a common ailment in an era where medical knowledge lagged behind ambition. He was buried at sea, clad in full armor, his body consigned to the depths he had so famously conquered. It was a fitting end for a man whose life was inextricably tied to the ocean. Drake's later years serve as a poignant reminder of the impermanence of fame and the capricious nature of fortune. His triumphs were undeniable, but so too were his failures. In the end, Sir Francis Drake was a man of his time, shaped by the forces of history, economics, and personal ambition. His story, like the sea itself, is both vast and deep, filled with the unpredictable currents of human endeavor. As we look ahead to the final chapters of his tale, it's clear that Drake's legacy is as complex as the world he helped to shape, a world that would never be the same again. And so, as Sir Francis Drake's life story draws to a close, we're left with the enduring puzzle of his legacy, one that's as tangled and salty as a sailor's knot. How did a man who danced the line between hero and villain become cemented in history as a national icon? Well, folks, it's time to pull back the curtain on the great Drake narrative and see what's really behind all that theatrical legend. First up, let's tackle the big one, Drake the hero. To England, he was a rock star of the high seas, a knight who defied the Spanish Empire and filled the coffers of a cash-strapped monarchy. His daring circumnavigation, a feat that covered 36,000 miles of treacherous ocean, was more than just a geographical triumph. It was a political statement. It screamed, "Hey, Spain, you're not the only game in town." For a country looking to punch above its weight, Drake's exploits were a morale booster wrapped in a treasure chest, topped with the Queen's approving nod. But let's not forget the flip side of the coin. To Spain, Drake was the scourge of the seas, a pirate with a fancy title and a penchant for plundering their treasure fleets. The Spanish called him El Drac, a name whispered with the kind of dread usually reserved for ghost stories, and they had every reason to fear him. Drake's raids on Spanish holdings in the Caribbean and the Americas were not just about treasure. They were strategic strikes aimed at undermining Spanish dominance. His capture of the treasure-laden Cacafugo galleon alone netted a haul worth around £600,000 in today's money. Not exactly chump change. So why does history remember Drake as a hero rather than a villain? Part of it is the simple fact that the victors write the history books. England, eager to boost its own image, leaned heavily into the romanticized version of Drake's story. The tales of his bravery and cunning were spun into the fabric of English nationalism, with just enough poetic license to keep things interesting. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good underdog story? The scrappy English sailor taking down the mighty Spanish armada is a narrative too tempting to resist. But if we're going to talk legacy, we can't ignore the economic and geopolitical ripples of Drake's voyages. His raids and discoveries helped lay the groundwork for England's expansion into a global maritime power. His circumnavigation opened up new trade routes and inspired future explorers, fueling the fire of the British Empire's ambitions. There's no denying that Drake was a catalyst for change, a man whose actions helped shape the course of history, even if the methods were less than noble. Let's take a moment to acknowledge the less glamorous side of exploration, the harsh economic realities that drove men like Drake to the seas. The age of exploration wasn't just about discovery. It was about survival in a world where resources were limited and competition was fierce. Nations like England were not the economic powerhouses they would later become. They were playing catch-up, desperate for the riches that would fund their ambitions. Drake's voyages weren't just adventures. They were investments, high-risk endeavors that could yield high rewards or devastating losses. And then there's the enduring allure of the explorer narrative. The romantic image of the fearless adventurer braving uncharted waters and unknown lands is one that has captivated the human imagination for centuries. It's easy to overlook the gritty reality, the scurvy, the storms, the constant threat of death, when the story is so tantalizing. Drake embodied that spirit of adventure, a figure larger than life whose exploits blur the line between myth and reality. In the public imagination, he became a symbol of human curiosity and ambition, a testament to the draw of the unknown. Reflecting on Drake's life, we get a masterclass in ambition, morality, and history's selective memory. His story reminds us that the past is often a tapestry of contradictions, where heroes can be villains and legends can obscure the truth. Drake was a man of his time, driven by the forces of history, economics, and personal ambition. His legacy is a reminder that history is not a simple tale of good versus evil, but a complex narrative shaped by perspective and power. As we wrap up this voyage through the life of Sir Francis Drake, let's leave with a few parting thoughts. History may remember him as a hero, but the reality is far more nuanced. Drake was a product of his environment, a time when the seas were as much a battleground as they were a highway to riches. His life was a testament to the human spirit, an exploration of the fine line between ambition and morality, and a reminder of the power of narrative to shape our understanding of the past. In the end, Drake's story is a chapter in the broader saga of exploration and empire, a tale that continues to echo through the annals of history. Whether you see him as a hero or a villain, there's no denying the impact of his life on the world stage. His voyages challenged the status quo, reshaping the map and redefining what was possible. And as we look back on his legacy, we're reminded that the real adventure lies not in the destination, but in the journey and the stories we tell along the way. So here's to Sir Francis Drake, the man, the myth, the legend, and the enduring enigma that continues to captivate our imaginations. In a world where the desert is your address and rain checks are literal, you'd think thriving as a civilization would be a pipe dream. Yet, here come the Nabataeans, with their flair for defying the odds and a knack for turning arid landscapes into thriving metropolises. Picture this, a once nomadic tribe that decided wandering wasn't as fulfilling as mastering the art of desert real estate. And thus, they morphed into some of the ancient world's most skilled city builders, leaving a legacy that still baffles scientists and history buffs alike. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Life in the desert isn't exactly a spa day. With the Arabian sun beating down like it's got a grudge, you'd think the Nabataeans would be the last group to transform such inhospitable terrain into bustling cities. But they did it, and they did it with style. Their piece de resistance, an ingenious water management system that would make even modern engineers do a double take. When you're living in one of the driest places on Earth, being besties with H2O isn't just smart, it's survival. The Nabataeans carved out their existence, literally, in the sandstone cliffs of what is now southern Jordan. We're talking about Petra, the crown jewel of their civilization, famously known as the Rose City due to the stunning color of the rock. This isn't some accidental tourist trap. Petra is a carefully planned masterpiece of urban planning and architectural engineering. While most folks were struggling to find a reliable water source, the Nabataeans were busy creating a network of dams, cisterns, and conduits that would make the Romans green with envy. It's like they looked at their barren surroundings and thought, challenge accepted. So, how did they pull off this miracle in the sand? Nabataeans were savvy traders who'd mastered the art of negotiation long before it was cool. By the 4th century BCE, they were controlling trade routes that crisscrossed the Arabian Peninsula, dealing in everything from frankincense and myrrh to spices and textiles. This wasn't your average flea market. These trading routes were the arteries of ancient commerce, pumping wealth into Nabataean coffers. With all that coin, they could afford to invest in some serious infrastructure. One of their most impressive feats was their ability to collect and store water. Imagine building an entire city without a river or consistent rainfall. It's like trying to run a coffee shop without beans. Yet, the Nabataeans built a complex system of rock-cut channels and underground cisterns that captured precious rainwater during the few times the sky decided to open up. These systems were so effective that Petra could support a population of up to 20,000 people, despite receiving only about 6 inches of rain annually. That's less than a tall latte, folks. And let's talk about those cisterns for a moment. The Nabataeans didn't just slap together a few parts and call it a day. These were massive reservoirs, some capable of holding over 200,000 gallons of water. To put that into perspective, that's enough to fill around 10,000 bathtubs. Their water management skills were so ahead of their time that even modern-day hydrologists give them a nod of respect. It's as if the Nabataeans took one look at the desert and said, "Challenge us," then proceeded to drop a mic. But it wasn't just about quenching their thirst. The Nabataeans were also architectural visionaries. Their early architectural achievements were as functional as they were beautiful. Take their temples, for instance. These were not just places of worship. They were statements of power and sophistication. The Temple of the Winged Lions, for one, boasted an altar with sculpted lions and a grand entrance that would make any visitor pause in awe. These weren't just structures. They were symbols of a thriving culture that had mastered its environment. What's particularly fascinating is how the Nabataeans managed to blend their architectural style with influences from their trading partners. You'll find hints of Greek and Roman design in their structures, which speaks to their cosmopolitan nature. They weren't just isolated desert dwellers. They were part of a much larger world, absorbing and adapting the best parts of the cultures they encountered. It's like they were playing a game of architectural Parkhamen, catching them all and integrating them seamlessly into their own designs. Let's not ignore the irony here. A civilization known for its water engineering emerged in one of the planet's driest spots. It's the kind of plot twist that makes history so deliciously unpredictable. The Nabataeans didn't just survive the desert, they thrived in it, crafting a legacy that has stood the test of time. Their architectural feats weren't just about aesthetics. They were about survival, innovation, and a stubborn refusal to be defined by their harsh surroundings. As we delve deeper into their world, we'll uncover more about how the Nabataeans turned the seemingly impossible into their playground. From their ingenious water systems to their impressive architectural prowess, the story of the Nabataeans is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. So sit tight, because this ride through the desert is just getting started. Now, speaking of playgrounds, let's wander into the labyrinthine world of Petra, the Nabataeans' architectural magnum opus that's carved right into the rose-tinted cliffs of southern Jordan. This isn't just a city, it's a testament to human audacity. Imagine sculpting an entire urban landscape out of rock, using nothing more than rudimentary tools and sheer willpower. It's like the Nabataeans looked at a mountain and said, "No problem, we'll just build a masterpiece here." The star of this rocky Broadway is undoubtedly the Al-Khazne, or the Treasury, which is about as misnamed as it gets. Spoiler alert, it's not a bank vault stuffed with gold coins or ancient relics. In fact, the whole treasury bit stems from local folklore, which claimed that an Egyptian pharaoh stashed his loot in the urn that crowns the structure. But let's face it, that urn is more decorative than practical, and any pharaoh worth his weight in gold would have found a less conspicuous piggy bank. The treasury is a jaw-dropping example of the Nabataeans' architectural genius, blending classical Greek elements with local flair. You can't help but notice the Corinthian columns and the intricate friezes, which scream Hellenistic influence, yet the overall design remains distinctly Nabataean. It's a beautiful marriage of styles that shouts, "We're worldly, but this is still our turf." And while we're on the subject of misnomers, the treasury wasn't even a financial hub. It was likely a royal tomb, a final resting place designed to impress both mortals and deities alike. It's like the ultimate status symbol of the ancient world, reminding everyone that the Nabataeans were not just savvy traders, but also cultural connoisseurs. Let's talk logistics, because this isn't just about aesthetics. Carving the treasury was no weekend DIY project. It involved meticulously chipping away at the cliff face, starting from the top down to avoid any catastrophic collapses. Imagine the precision and patience needed to complete a 40-meter-high facade, with nothing but hand tools and a vision. It's a process that makes today's construction projects, with their cranes and power tools, seem almost comically easy. Yet Petra is more than just the treasury, as grand as it is. The city sprawls over 100 square kilometers, packed with tombs, temples, and theaters, all hewn from the living rock. The Nabataeans transformed the canyon walls into a sprawling metropolis, where every corner turned reveals another architectural surprise. The city was not just a hub for trade. It was a cultural melting pot, where influences from across the ancient world converged. This cosmopolitan vibe is reflected in the architectural diversity, where you can spot everything from Greco-Roman theaters to distinctly Arabian motifs. Now, let's get real about the myths. Beyond the romantic tales of hidden treasures and ancient curses, Petra's true magic lies in its role as a testament to the Nabataeans' adaptability and ingenuity. It wasn't just a city carved for show. It was a thriving center of commerce and culture. The Nabataeans capitalized on their strategic location along the trade routes, turning Petra into a bustling marketplace. The city's design reflects this, with wide streets and public spaces where traders from around the world could haggle over spices, silks, and other exotic goods. It's easy to get swept up in the romanticism of Petra, to imagine Indiana Jones-style adventures and hidden chambers filled with untold riches. But the reality is both more mundane and more impressive. The Nabataeans didn't need a magical treasure to dazzle the world. Their skills in engineering, architecture, and trade were riches enough. The city's true treasure was its ability to sustain a thriving population in the heart of the desert, to become a beacon of civilization where none should logically exist. Yet, the grandeur of Petra wasn't just about economic prosperity. It was a statement of identity and resilience, a declaration that the Nabataeans were here to stay. The harsh desert was no match for their ingenuity, and Petra stood as a testament to their mastery over the environment. The city's very existence throws down the gauntlet to nature, proving that human determination can carve out a legacy even in the most inhospitable of landscapes. But before we get too smug about the Nabataeans' triumphs, let's remember that their success was also a product of their time. The trade routes that fueled their prosperity were a double-edged sword, bringing wealth, but also attracting the attention of larger empires. The Romans, never ones to ignore a good thing, eventually absorbed the Nabataean kingdom into their ever-expanding empire in 106 CE. Petra, once a vibrant hub of Nabataean ingenuity, became just another jewel in the Roman crown. Yet, the ruins of Petra still whisper tales of its glorious past, a silent reminder of a civilization that dared to defy the desert. As the sun sets over the rose-red cliffs, casting long shadows over the ancient streets, one can almost hear the echoes of a bustling marketplace, the distant hum of a city alive with possibility. So, as we continue this journey through the sands of time, remember that Petra's story is far from over. There's more to uncover about the Nabataeans' architectural prowess, their cultural legacy, and the myths that continue to enchant us. Stay tuned, because this ancient tale is just heating up. So as we pick up from where we left Petra casting its spell under the desert's twilight, let's dive into the economic guts of this stone kingdom. Forget about digging for buried treasure. Petra's real wealth was its role as a nerve center of the ancient spice trade. If you're imagining a bustling bazaar with merchants haggling over cardamom and cinnamon, you're spot on. This was commerce at its fragrant finest, and the Nabataeans were the undisputed maestros of moving goods faster than you can say, frankincense. Now, let's set the scene. It's the 1st century BCE, and Petra is basically the Amazon Prime of its day, minus the drones and free 2-day delivery. Instead, the Nabataeans had a caravan network that could rival any modern logistics company. These trade routes were the ancient world's Silk Road for spices, and the Nabataeans were the kings of this aromatic empire. They managed to control the flow of incense, myrrh, and spices from South Arabia to the Mediterranean, a journey that could take months. Imagine trying to ship your favorite essential oils and having them arrive a full season later. Yet in the ancient world, this was the cutting edge of commerce. The rise of Petra as a commercial hub wasn't just luck, it was strategic brilliance. The city's location was no accident. It sat smack dab on the crossroads of several major trade routes. It's like they found the perfect piece of real estate that every caravan had to pass. And while the scenery was undoubtedly Instagram-worthy, it was the trade tariffs that truly enriched the Nabataean coffers. They levied tolls on the merchants passing through, which is how you turn a rock-carving hobby into a thriving economy. But the Nabataeans weren't just toll collectors. They were savvy businessmen who knew how to diversify. They didn't just sit back and rake in the cash from passing traders. They became traders themselves, dealing in the very spices and incense they helped transport. This dual role as both middlemen and merchants allowed them to command prices and increase their profit margins. Talk about having your cake and eating it too. Except in this case, it's more like having your cinnamon and selling it too. Let's not forget the sheer scale of this operation. We're talking about camel caravans that could stretch for miles, carrying tons of goods across the desert. A single caravan might consist of hundreds of camels, each laden with around 300 pounds of precious cargo. That's over 30 tons of goods, all moving across some of the harshest terrain on the planet. And the Nabataeans, with their intimate knowledge of the desert, made sure these caravans moved like clockwork. Of course, it's not just about the spice trade. The Nabataeans understood the value of diversification long before Wall Street made it mainstream. They weren't just peddling spices. They were also dealing in textiles, precious metals, and even bitumen from the Dead Sea, which was used in ancient embalming practices. Their willingness to trade in a variety of goods is what kept their economy robust and resilient, even when the winds of trade shifted. Now, while we're busy being impressed by their economic acumen, it's important to debunk a few myths along the way. For one, the romantic notion that the desert was an impassable barrier is just that, a notion. The Nabataeans thrived precisely because they knew how to navigate these so-called barriers. They had an uncanny ability to read the desert, to understand its rhythms, and use them to their advantage. This wasn't just survival. It was a master class in turning adversity into opportunity. The Nabataeans' economic success wasn't just about moving goods. It was about moving ideas. Petra was a melting pot of cultures and influences, a place where East met West in a vibrant exchange. Traders from Arabia, Egypt, Rome, and beyond converged here, bringing not just their goods but their stories, technologies, and beliefs. This cultural cross-pollination is evident in the architectural and artistic styles that flourished in Petra, reflecting a world where borders were porous and ideas were the true currency. As we dig deeper into the mechanics of Nabataean commerce, it becomes clear that their success wasn't just a matter of geography. It was a product of vision and strategy, a reminder that even in the harshest environments, innovation can flourish. The Nabataeans didn't just survive the desert. They turned it into a thriving marketplace, a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. And while the Nabataeans were busy making Petra the epicenter of trade, they were also laying the groundwork for their architectural wonders. The wealth generated from their thriving spice trade didn't just line their pockets. It funded the construction of the grand facades and monumental tombs that define Petra's skyline. This isn't just a story of economic prosperity. It's a tale of how commerce can fuel cultural and architectural innovation. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The Nabataeans' success was also their vulnerability. Their prosperity caught the eye of powerful neighbors like Rome, who were always on the lookout for a lucrative addition to their empire. And as history would have it, the Nabataean kingdom eventually fell into Roman hands, a reminder that every golden age has its sunset. Yet, even under Roman rule, Petra continued to thrive, its status as a trading hub undiminished. So, as we prepare to delve further into the Nabataeans' architectural marvels and their eventual fate, keep in mind that the story of Petra is as much about economics as it is about engineering. It's a narrative that underscores the timeless interplay between commerce, culture, and creativity, a dance as old as civilization itself. Next, we'll explore how the Nabataeans' mastery of trade and architecture set the stage for their enduring legacy. From the bustling markets of Petra to the mysterious allure of their rock-hewn tombs, there's more to uncover in this saga of desert defiance. Stay tuned, because the sands of time are still shifting, and the Nabataean story is far from finished. As the Nabataeans strutted their stuff in the vibrant marketplace of Petra, it wasn't just the aroma of spices that hung in the air. City buzzed with political intrigue and social maneuvering that would make any medieval court look like amateur hour. Think of Petra not just as a trade hub, but as an ancient stage where the drama of power played out with all the subtlety of a Shakespearean plot twist. First off, let's talk alliances. The Nabataeans knew that in the ruthless world of ancient geopolitics, you were either making friends or making enemies. As their wealth grew, so did their political savvy. They cozied up to powers like the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Hasmoneans of Judea, playing the ancient version of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. In 62 BCE, Roman III, the Nabataean king, even gained control over Damascus, a move that upped their political game and put them on Rome's radar, for better or worse. Now, here's the kicker. The Nabataeans weren't just political chess players. They were architectural storytellers. Their urban planning wasn't just about aesthetics or functionality. It was a declaration of power and influence. The street layout of Petra, with its grand avenues and monumental facades, was a clear message to any visitor. You're in the presence of a civilization that's got its act together. It's like rolling out a red carpet made of sandstone to announce your arrival on the world stage. The social hierarchy within Nabataean society also left its mark on Petra's urban landscape. The lavish tombs and temples weren't just for show. They were symbols of status and power. The elites buried in those grand mausoleums were sending a not-so-subtle message. Even in death, they were a cut above the rest. Meanwhile, the more modest dwellings and workshops nestled in the valley spoke of a thriving middle class and a bustling artisan community. It's a bit like comparing a suburban mansion to a city loft. Both tell you a lot about who lives there. And let's not forget the temples. These weren't just places for spiritual reflection. They were arenas of political influence. The Temple of the Winged Lions, for example, wasn't just a religious site. It was a gathering place where the political elite could rub shoulders and make deals that would shape the fate of the kingdom. It's like a cross between a church and a country, where the real action happened behind the altar. Of course, the Nabataeans weren't insulated from the regional power struggles that swirled around them. Their strategic location was both a blessing and a curse, inviting attention from larger empires like the Seleucids and eventually the Romans. In 106 CE, the Roman Emperor Trajan formally annexed the Nabataean kingdom, integrating it into the vast Roman Empire. Petra, once a symbol of Nabataean independence and ingenuity, became a provincial outpost. Yet, even under Roman rule, the city retained its commercial vibrancy, a testament to the enduring strength of its foundations. Now, let's debunk a persistent myth, the notion that the Nabataeans were isolated desert nomads who stumbled upon their success by accident. In reality, they were shrewd statesmen who navigated a complex web of alliances and rivalries. It's a reminder that behind every ancient marvel is a story of human ambition and cunning. As we peel back the layers of Nabataean society, it becomes clear that their architectural achievements were as much about power dynamics as they were about artistic expression. The grand facades of Petra weren't just carved for the sake of beauty. They were crafted to impress and intimidate, to communicate both cultural sophistication and political might. So, while we admire the artistry of Petra's rose-red tombs and towering temples, let's not forget the political and social forces that shaped them. The Nabataeans were master architects not just in stone, but in the very fabric of their society. They understood that architecture was more than mere construction. It was a language, a means to convey power, prestige, and permanence. As we continue this journey through the sands of history, remember that Petra's story isn't just one of artistic triumph. It's a saga of political intrigue and social evolution. From the alliances that fortified their kingdom to the social structures that defined their urban landscape, the Nabataeans were both architects and actors on the stage of ancient history. And as the sun sets once more over the sandstone cliffs, casting long shadows over the ancient city, we're reminded that the story of Petra is far from over. There are yet more secrets buried in the sands, waiting to be uncovered in the next chapter of this enduring tale. As we continue this deep dive into the sands of history, the Nabataeans stand as a testament to human ingenuity, daring to carve out a civilization in a world that seemed determined to swallow them whole. But like all great stories, there's always a twist. The Nabataeans didn't just fade quietly into the desert sunset. They were absorbed into the sprawling Roman Empire, which had an insatiable appetite for annexation that would make even the most ambitious empire builder blush. In 106 CE, when Emperor Trajan decided that the Nabataean kingdom would make a nice addition to his collection, the transition was surprisingly smooth. There were no epic battles or cinematic clashes. It was more like a corporate takeover than a hostile invasion. The Nabataeans, always the pragmatic traders, seemed to have realized that fighting Rome was a losing proposition. So they joined the Roman fold, with Petra becoming part of the newly minted Roman province of Arabia Petrea. This was Rome's way of saying, welcome to the family, a family that demanded taxes rather than birthday cards. Now, let's get something straight. The Roman annexation wasn't the end of Petra's story. Far from it. Under Roman rule, Petra continued to thrive as a commercial hub. City's strategic position and its role as a trading nexus were just too valuable to let slide into obscurity. The Romans, ever the infrastructure enthusiasts, even upgraded the city's road systems and integrated Petra more firmly into their vast network. Petra's amphitheater, capable of seating 500 people, was expanded, reflecting the Roman love for grand spectacles. It was like adding a few extra rows to your favorite sports stadium. Yet the Roman influence wasn't just about roads and theaters. It was a cultural coup, a reshaping of the Nabataean identity. The architectural styles began to shift, with Roman arches and columns starting to appear alongside the traditional Nabataean rock-cut facades. It was a visual representation of cultural melding, like seeing a toga-clad senator sipping Nabataean wine while lounging in a rock-cut villa. But let's not romanticize this transition too much. The Roman presence also marked the beginning of the end for the Nabataeans as a distinct political entity. The wealth of Petra, once carefully managed by Nabataean kings, was now subject to Roman taxes and oversight. Economic autonomy waned, and the Nabataeans, once masters of their own desert domain, became part of the Roman machine. It's a classic tale of innovation being swallowed by the very system it once defied. Now, before we cue the violins and start shedding tears for the Nabataeans, let's appreciate the legacy they left behind. Petra, with its awe-inspiring architecture, is a monument to human perseverance and creativity. The city's water management systems were so advanced that they remained in use for centuries, a testament to the Nabataeans' engineering prowess. Those rock-cut tombs and temples speak volumes about their artistic sensibilities and their ability to blend influences from the cultures they traded with. It's as if they were saying, "We may be gone, but our art will stand the test of time." The myths surrounding the Nabataeans are as enduring as the stone facades of Petra itself. Stories of hidden treasures and secret chambers continue to captivate our imaginations. And who can blame us? There's a certain allure to the idea of a lost civilization, its secrets waiting to be unearthed by some intrepid explorer. But let's get real. The true treasure of Petra isn't gold or jewels, but the knowledge and inspiration it offers. It's a classroom carved in stone, teaching us about adaptation, resilience, and the delicate dance between culture and commerce. As we wrap up this journey through Nabataean history, let's reflect on the lessons they offer. The Nabataeans remind us that innovation often arises from necessity. Their ability to thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth was no accident. It was the result of careful planning, shrewd alliances, and an unyielding spirit. And while their kingdom may have been absorbed into the vast Roman Empire, their legacy lives on in the rose-red city they left behind. In the end, the story of the Nabataeans is a reminder of the impermanence of human achievements. Even the mightiest civilizations can be swept away by the tides of history, but the echoes of their ingenuity can still be heard across the ages. So the next time you're grappling with a challenge, remember the Nabataeans. If they could turn a barren desert into a thriving metropolis, maybe we, too, can carve out our own legacies in the face of adversity. And with that, our tale of the Nabataeans comes to a close. So as you drift off to sleep, let the whispers of the desert winds carry you back to the ancient streets of Petra, where history and myth blend into a tapestry of wonder. Who knows what other secrets are waiting to be discovered beneath those rose-tinted sands? If the Neo-Assyrian Empire were a playlist, it would start with a hard-hitting track called Conquest and Control, and end with a power ballad about architectural ambition. This empire didn't just rise around 911 BC. It exploded onto the scene like a headliner at an ancient rock festival, stretching its influence from the eastern Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. We're talking about a geographical span that would make modern-day road trippers jealous, covering parts of what are now Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran. It's like they took the concept of a neighborhood block party and expanded it over thousands of miles. In the heart of this sprawling empire was Nineveh, a city so grand it could make the modern urban jungle look like a modest garden party. And then there was Nimrod, a city that was essentially Nineveh's equally ambitious sibling. These places weren't just cities. They were meticulously planned urban landscapes, the ancient blueprint for what we might now call a planned community, minus the homeowners' association fees and cookie-cutter houses. The Neo-Assyrians were obsessed with architecture in the way some people are obsessed with reality TV, totally, completely, and without shame. Their structures weren't just buildings. They were statements like the ziggurats, which stood as their version of skyscrapers. Picture a massive tiered cake made of mud bricks and stone, reaching for the heavens. These weren't just places of worship or administration. They were the ultimate status symbols, saying, "Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair." In a way only ancient megastructures could. But let's be real. Were these ziggurats, like the one in Gyökuregaltsu, standing proudly at around 60 meters tall, really practical, or just a form of ancient bling? Were they the skyscrapers of their time, or just really expensive, vertically ambitious real estate? It's like building a mansion to store your sneaker collection. The Assyrians had a thing for grandeur, and these ziggurats were their way of flexing on everyone else in the neighborhood. Now, let's dive a bit deeper into this love affair with monumental architecture. The Neo-Assyrians weren't just showing off. Their architectural feats were a blend of religious devotion, political propaganda, and economic prowess. Think of it as the ultimate mixtape of motivations. Each ziggurat was like an ancient billboard shouting to the world about the god's favor, the king's power, and the wealth of the empire. It was like having your name in lights, if those lights were made of sun-baked bricks, and the name was that of a king who had conquered half the known world. And speaking of kings, they weren't just rulers. They were the rock stars of their era, with grand palaces to match. Take Achaemenid II, the king who thought big and built even bigger. His palace in Nimrod was a sprawling complex that covered over 100,000 square meters. To put that in perspective, that's larger than most modern-day shopping malls. Not only did it serve as his residence, but it also functioned as the administrative heart of the empire. It was like the White House, the Pentagon, and a five-star resort all rolled into one, without the Wi-Fi, of course. But let's not get too swept away by the romantic notion of these ancient marvels. The reality was more gritty. Building these structures required an enormous workforce, often composed of prisoners of war and conscripted laborers. It wasn't exactly a voluntary habitat for humanity project. The empire relied heavily on its ability to mobilize human resources, and the cost was not just in bricks and mortar, but in human sweat and lives. It's a bit like hosting an epic party and making everyone else pay for it. The Neo-Assyrians were also keen on urban planning, making sure their cities were not just haphazard clusters of buildings, but well-organized entities. They implemented straight streets, intricate drainage systems, and grand public spaces. It's like they were the ancient pioneers of city zoning laws, but with a bit more flair and a lot more ceremonial bull sacrifices. As we step back and take a broader view, it's clear that these architectural accomplishments were more than just vanity projects. They were expressions of the empire's might and a testament to its central role in the ancient world. The Neo-Assyrians knew that to control an empire, you needed more than just military might. You needed to dazzle, intimidate, and awe both your subjects and your rivals. These structures were the empire's way of saying, we are here, and we're not going anywhere. So, were the Neo-Assyrian ziggurats ancient skyscrapers, or just really expensive real estate? Maybe a bit of both. They were a reflection of an empire at its zenith, flexing its architectural muscles and leaving a legacy that would echo through history. And as we continue this journey through the marvels of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, remember, every stone, every brick, every grand edifice was a part of a bigger story. A story of ambition, power, and the enduring human desire to leave a mark on the world. And speaking of leaving a mark, the Neo-Assyrians didn't just stop at towering ziggurats and sprawling palaces. They were also the ancient world's equivalent of infrastructure junkies, with a penchant for roads and aqueducts that would make any civil engineer swoon. Let's put it this way. If you're going to run an empire that stretches across thousands of miles, you better have some decent roads. Otherwise, your chariots are just going to end up in a Mesopotamian traffic jam, and nobody wants that. The Assyrian road network was a game changer, both for the empire and for the history of transportation. Picture this, a vast network of roads, meticulously constructed to connect far-flung regions, allowing for the swift movement of armies, merchants, and messages. It was like the ancient Silk Road, but with more dust and fewer Instagram influencers. These roads were so effective that some historians claim they were the first true highways in history. And we're not talking about a couple of dirt paths here. The Royal Road, for example, stretched over 500 miles, connecting the empire from the Mediterranean all the way to the heart of Mesopotamia. That's like driving from New York City to Miami without a single rest stop. Now, let's talk logistics. Constructing this kind of infrastructure wasn't a weekend DIY project. It required a massive workforce, and spoiler alert, it wasn't exactly a volunteer gig. The Neo-Assyrians relied on conscripted labor, often pulling in prisoners of war to do the heavy lifting. It was less community service, and more work or else. And while the roads were undoubtedly a boon for the empire's economy, facilitating trade and the movement of goods, they also served a more ominous purpose. These roads were the veins through which the empire's military might flowed. In times of war, the Assyrians could mobilize their troops with terrifying speed, projecting power across their vast domain like a shadow over the land. But roads were just the beginning. When it came to water management, the Neo-Assyrians were playing a whole different ball game. Enter the aqueducts, those marvels of engineering that brought life-giving water to the parched cities of the empire. It's like they were the ancient pioneers of urban plumbing, ensuring that their cities had a steady supply of water, even in the driest seasons. The aqueducts were not just practical, they were a statement. They proclaimed the empire's ability to harness nature itself, bending it to the will of the king. One of the most famous of these aqueducts was the one at Jerwan, constructed under the reign of Sennacherib around 690 BC. This aqueduct stretched over 30 miles, channeling water from the mountains to the city of Nineveh. It wasn't just a functional piece of infrastructure, it was a work of art. The aqueduct featured stone inscriptions that boasted of Sennacherib's divine mandate to rule and his benevolent provision of water to his people. It's like the ancient equivalent of a government billboard, reminding everyone who was really in charge. However, let's not get too misty-eyed over the romance of aqueducts and roads. The reality was far grittier. Building these structures required immense resources, both human and material. The laborers who toiled on these projects worked under harsh conditions, with little in the way of compensation or recognition. It's the ancient version of paying your dues, except the dues were paid in sweat and sometimes blood. Economically, these infrastructure projects were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they facilitated commerce, boosted local economies, and helped integrate the empire's disparate regions. On the other hand, they were a massive drain on the empire's coffers. Maintaining such an extensive network required constant upkeep and repair, not to mention the initial outlay for construction. It was like having a luxury car that constantly needed servicing, impressive but expensive. And this brings us to the heart of the matter. Were these engineering feats practical necessities, or were they simply grandiose expressions of imperial power? The answer, as with most things in history, is a bit of both. The roads and aqueducts were undeniably practical, but they were also a form of propaganda. They were a way for the kings to say, "Look what I built," simultaneously ensuring their subjects could see the might of the empire in every stone and every flowing stream. In the end, the Neo-Assyrian approach to infrastructure was a testament to their go big or go home philosophy. They weren't just building for the present. They were constructing a legacy, one that would be remembered long after the empire itself had crumbled into dust. So, as we continue to unravel the story of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, let's remember that every road, every aqueduct, and every stone was more than just a piece of history. It was a statement of power, ambition, and the unyielding human desire to conquer not just the land, but the very elements themselves. And with that, we leave behind the roads and waterways, setting our sights on the next chapter of this ancient epic. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. As we pivot from the grand highways and aqueducts, let's step into the world of Neo-Assyrian architecture, where artistry and politics were as intertwined as a pair of ancient earthen-bred twists. We're diving into a realm where walls spoke louder than words, literally, with intricate reliefs that could put modern-day murals to shame. Imagine the palaces of Nineveh and Nimrod, not just as buildings, but as colossal canvases of stone, each depicting tales of conquest, divine favor, and kingly prowess. These palaces were the ancient equivalent of an imperial Instagram feed, curated not with filters, but with chisels and sweat. Take Ashurnasirpal Roman II Palace in Nimrod, for instance. This wasn't just a big house. It was a statement, a sprawling complex that screamed power and wealth. Covering over 100,000 square meters, it wasn't just about size. It was about making sure everyone knew who was in charge. Think of it as the ancient version of a billionaire's mansion. But instead of a Tesla in the driveway, you had a throne room lined with the plundered treasures of conquered lands. Now, let's talk about those reliefs. If you ever wondered what ancient power looked like, it was this. Stone panels meticulously carved with scenes of hunting, war, and divine interaction. The Assyrians didn't just want you to know they were powerful. They wanted you to see it, to feel it in the grooves of the stone. These reliefs were the propaganda posters of their day, etched into the very walls of their cities. Imagine walking through a palace where every corridor is a history lesson and every wall is a headline screaming, Assyria, the empire that never sleeps. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. While these reliefs are stunning, they're also a bit like the ancient version of clickbait. Sure, they capture the grandeur of the empire, but they conveniently omit the less glamorous details, like the forced labor used to build them. Behind each masterpiece were countless laborers, often prisoners of war, working under harsh conditions. It's a bit like admiring a beautiful cake without acknowledging the tired baker who slaved over it for hours. Economically, these artistic endeavors were as much a burden as they were a boon. The sheer resources poured into creating these palaces and reliefs were staggering. We're talking tons of alabaster and gypsum, not to mention the human cost. Yet for the Assyrian kings, the expense was justified. These works weren't just about aesthetics, they were about control. They were a way to project power, to remind both subjects and rivals of the empire's might. It was as if each relief was whispering, "We're watching you, and we're not to be trifled with." The artistry of the Neo-Assyrians wasn't just confined to palaces, though. Their temples were equally grand, serving as both places of worship and symbols of divine right. The Temple of Nabu at Nineveh was one such structure, a place where the gods and the empire's political agenda met in a harmonious, albeit sometimes coercive, embrace. These temples were adorned with similar reliefs, celebrating the gods' favor and the king's divine mandate. It was a clever bit of marketing, blending religion and politics into an unassailable narrative of authority. And here's where we get to the heart of the matter, the dual purpose of these works. Sure, they were artistic masterpieces, but they were also tools of imperial messaging. Each relief was a story, a carefully crafted narrative that reinforced the empire's ideology. They were designed to awe and inspire, but also to intimidate. It was a bit like watching a blockbuster movie with an underlying political agenda. Entertaining, yes, but with a not-so-subtle message. In the end, the Neo-Assyrians' architectural achievements were more than just feats of engineering or artistic expression. They were a testament to the empire's ambition, a tangible representation of its power and reach. Yet, as with all things grand, there was a darker side. These structures were built on the backs of the many, for the glory of the few. It's a story as old as civilization itself, one of beauty and brutality, of art and oppression. As we continue to peel back the layers of this ancient empire, remember that every stone, every carving, and every towering ziggurat tells a story. It's a narrative of ambition and power, of human endeavor and exploitation. And while the Neo-Assyrians have long since vanished into the annals of history, their legacy endures, etched in stone and memory. So stay tuned, because the story of the Neo-Assyrian Empire is far from over, and there's still much more to uncover in the chapters ahead. As the Neo-Assyrian Empire strutted its stuff with an architectural swagger that would make even the most extravagant modern mogul blush, their buildings weren't just for show. They were the very bedrock of a finely tuned social stratification system. The Assyrians didn't just build, they sculpted a hierarchy out of mud brick and stone, creating a social ladder that rose as high as their ziggurats. This wasn't just about stacking stones, it was about stacking power, influence, and divine right. Let's dive into the socio-political jungle that was Assyrian society, where architecture wasn't just a backdrop, but a key player in the Game of Thrones. Picture a world where the king, perched atop his ziggurat-like hierarchy, wasn't just a ruler but a semi-divine figure, a sort of ancient influencer with a direct line to the gods. These towering structures whispered, or shouted, to everyone below, "The gods are on my speed dial, and they've got my back." This was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about political clout, a reminder that the king was the closest thing to a deity walking the earth. Now, let's talk about those who weren't living the high life in palatial splendor. Beneath the king, a tiered society unfolded, and architecture played its part in maintaining the status quo. The elite nobles were nestled in grand homes near the palaces, a stone's throw from power and influence. Meanwhile, the common folk, artisans, and laborers found themselves quite literally at the base of the social pyramid, living in more modest, tightly packed quarters. It was a real estate market where location wasn't just about convenience. It was about proximity to the divine and earthly power. But don't let the opulence fool you into thinking this was a utopia of marble and gold. These grandiose structures were as much a burden as they were a blessing. The cost of maintaining such architectural vanity projects was astronomical. Imagine the empire's treasury as a sieve, with resources pouring into the construction and upkeep of these colossal edifices. The kings were like ancient CEOs, juggling a balance sheet where the line between glory and bankruptcy was razor-thin. And while the elite might have lived in splendor, the economic burden often trickled down, resulting in heavy taxation and forced labor for the masses. It's the classic tale of the haves and the have-nots, only with a bit more sun-baked clay and fewer hedge funds. Now, let's flip the script and talk about the religious side of things. The Neo-Assyrians were nothing if not devout. At least, that's what they wanted you to think. Their temples weren't just places of worship. They were political tools, carefully crafted narratives of divine favor. Each temple was a stage where the king could play both the devoted servant and the chosen ruler, a masterclass in political theater. It's like the difference between attending church for the sermon and attending for the networking opportunities. Sure, the guards were important, but they also conveniently bolstered the king's public image. The Temple of Ashur in the city of Ashur was the spiritual heart of the empire and a prime example of this divine political fusion. This temple wasn't just an architectural gem. It was a testament to the empire's might and the king's sanctioned rule. The priests, handpicked by the king, served as both spiritual leaders and political operatives, ensuring that the divine narrative aligned perfectly with the royal agenda. The rituals performed here were as much about maintaining cosmic order as they were about reinforcing the king's earthly authority. It was a bit like using a heavenly endorsement to secure your earthly dominion. But let's not romanticize this blend of politics and religion too much. The reality was that the common people, those at the bottom of this divine hierarchy, often bore the brunt of the costs associated with these grand temples. While the king and his court enjoyed divine favor, the laborers who built these sacred spaces worked under grueling conditions, their hands crafting the very stones that would elevate the king's status. It's the age-old tale of sweat and toil for someone else's glory, a narrative as enduring as the stones themselves. Let's circle back to the architectural burden. Those grand palaces, temples, and ziggurats didn't just spring up like daisies. They required a workforce of epic proportions, often conscripted from among the conquered peoples and local populations. This wasn't a weekend volunteer gig. It was hard labor under the scorching Mesopotamian sun. Imagine a scene where the empire's grandeur is built on a foundation of sweat, blood, and a fair amount of tears. The kings might have been the architects of their destiny, but the laborers were the ones laying the bricks. Economically, this construction frenzy was both a boon and a bane. On the one hand, it stimulated local economies, creating demand for materials and skilled labor. On the other hand, it drained resources faster than a chariot in a race, leading to economic strain and social unrest. For the Neo-Assyrian kings, it was a delicate balancing act, maintaining their architectural legacy without tipping the scales into financial chaos. So, as we peer through the lens of Assyrian society, it's clear that architecture was more than just a backdrop. It was a dynamic force shaping the empire's social and political landscape. These structures were the empire's Facebook page and press release, a tangible testament to its power and ambition. Yet, beneath the grandeur, there lay the harsh realities of a society where the burden of maintaining such splendor often outweighed the benefits. As we step back from the shadow of the ziggurats and the palatial corridors, let's remember that every brick and every stone tells a story, not just of kings and guards, but of the countless individuals whose labor and lives constructed the empire's legacy. This isn't just a tale of ancient grandeur, it's a timeless narrative of human ambition, struggle, and the pursuit of power. And as we prepare to delve deeper into the Neo-Assyrian saga, keep your eyes on the horizon, because the story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be as thrilling as the last. As we prepare to delve deeper into the Neo-Assyrian saga, keep your eyes on the horizon, because the story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be as thrilling as the last. Hold on to your hard hats, folks, because we're diving headfirst into the grand finale of this architectural escapade, reflecting on the legacy these ancient marvels left behind. Let's start by addressing the elephant, or perhaps the ziggurat, in the room. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was an architectural juggernaut, but it was also a cautionary tale of what happens when you invest more in stone than in society. The empire, with its colossal constructions dating back to around 911 BC, was like that kid in school who had all the flashiest gadgets, but no backup plan for the future. They built monuments that could make even the most jaded modern architect drool, but those monuments couldn't hold back the tides of history. The empire's collapse around 609 BC, after a whopping 3 centuries of grandeur, wasn't just about the usual suspects of overextension and rebellion. It was also about a fundamental imbalance, an empire that chose to flex its muscles in stone while losing touch with the very people who laid those bricks. It's a bit like pouring all your resources into building a mansion without bothering to fix the leaky roof. Here's the nitty-gritty. The empire, at its peak, controlled vast territories stretching across modern Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, but maintaining such a sprawling domain was an economic tightrope walk. The grand projects, the ziggurats, palaces, and aqueducts, drained the coffers faster than a Mesopotamian sandstorm. Sure, they had roads and aqueducts that were engineering marvels, but they also had an economy stretched thin by the constant need for repairs and upkeep. It was like owning a fleet of vintage cars, impressive, but always in the shop. Now, let's sprinkle in some social context. The Neo-Assyrian rulers, with their penchant for grandiosity, often forgot the golden rule of leadership. Keep your subjects happy, or at least not revolting. The relentless demand for labor and resources bred resentment among the conquered peoples, and even within their own ranks. It's the classic story of the haves and have-nots. Only in this case, the have-nots were armed and increasingly disgruntled. But let's not paint the Assyrians as mere villains in this historical drama. Their architectural legacy offers a wealth of lessons in both ambition and hubris. They were pioneers in urban planning, laying the groundwork for future cities with their intricate drainage systems and well-organized streets. They were also trailblazers in using architecture as a tool for propaganda, turning their cities into living billboards of imperial power. It's as if each ziggurat was a neon sign flashing. Look at us, we're kind of a big deal. So, what do we take away from all this? Well, the Assyrians remind us that while building big can be impressive, it's not a substitute for building wisely. Their story is a testament to the fact that no amount of monumental architecture can substitute for a stable society. In the end, the Assyrians' greatest legacy wasn't their towering ziggurats or sprawling palaces, but the lesson that power built on shaky foundations is bound to crumble. It's a tale as old as time. Empires rise, empires fall, but the stories and the stones remain. In the grand tapestry of history, the Neo-Assyrian Empire stands as a glittering thread woven with both awe and caution. Their architectural feats continue to inspire, serving as a reminder of human ambition's boundless reach. Yet they also offer a sobering reflection on the importance of balance, between power and people, between ambition and reality. As we wrap up this journey through the Neo-Assyrian world, let's remember that history is not just about dates and stones. It's about the stories that those stones tell, the lessons they impart, and the enduring human spirit that seeks to build, to create, and to leave a mark. So, the next time you gaze upon a skyscraper or walk through a city park, think of the Assyrians, the ancient architects of ambition, and the legacy they left behind. Because in the end, it's not just about what we build, but about what we learn from what we build. And that, dear friends, is the real marvel.